My name is Nava Wilson. I am 29 years old. The hardest part about watching your father throw your house keys into the street is not the disrespect. It is the stark realization that the people who gave you life are actively trying to destroy it. Bozeman, Montana is known for its wide-open skies and quiet, sprawling neighborhoods. My house, a 4-bedroom modern craftsman on a manicured cul-de-sac, was my sanctuary. I bought it at 27 after 5 years of 70-hour work weeks working as a financial analyst. It was the physical manifestation of my independence. The sound of the new deadbolt clicking into place echoed across the porch. I stood on my own front lawn, the Montana evening chill biting through my blazer, holding a single shattered piece of ceramic. It was a plate I had painted when I was 9, a clumsy bluebird with uneven wings. Now it lay in shards across the welcome mat, tossed outside like trash. My father, Richard, stood on the other side of the threshold. He did not look angry. He looked triumphant. The wrinkles around his eyes tightened as he held up my spare set of house keys, the ones I kept hidden inside the fake rock by the hydrangeas, and flicked his wrist. The metal keys arced through the twilight air and landed with a dull metallic clink in the street gutter. "This is her house now, Nava," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any parental warmth. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my family delusion, I need to ask you something. At what age did you realize your own family was toxic? Drop your age in the comments and hit that subscribe button to support the Morning Revenge channel. We bring you real stories about drawing the hardest lines. Behind my father, the front door swung wider. Haley, my 26-year-old sister, leaned against the doorframe. My stomach tightened. She was wearing my custom-tailored gray cashmere sweater, the one I had purchased to celebrate my promotion to senior analyst just last month. I could see the sleeves were slightly too long for her, drooping over her wrists. In her right hand, she held my favorite custom-ordered coffee mug, blowing on the rising steam. She took a sip, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim, and offered a slow, deliberate smile. My pulse tapped a steady, cool rhythm against my throat. I did not scream. I did not beg. Decades of dealing with Richard gaslighting me and Haley demanding the world had trained me to process betrayal like a corporate balance sheet. I was identifying the deficit, isolating the liability, and preparing to mitigate the loss. Haley had failed out of 2 degree programs. She had totaled a car our parents bought her. She always required a soft landing, and I was expected to be the mattress. Every time she quit a job or ruined a relationship, my parents looked to my bank account and my stability to fix it. Today was the final ledger entry. I looked around the yard. My belongings were scattered across the frosted grass. A silk blouse hung awkwardly over a rhododendron bush. A pair of my running shoes sat half buried in the flower bed dirt. The sheer visual of my private life aired out for the neighborhood to see was designed to humiliate me. Across the street, I could see the silhouette of Mrs. Gable parting her living room blinds to watch the spectacle. My parents wanted a scene. They wanted a screaming match on the lawn to justify their cruelty, a narrative they could spin to the neighbors about the ungrateful, hysterical daughter who had to be put in her place. I denied them the satisfaction. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. Ignoring my father's taunting gaze, I opened my home security app. A red banner flashed across the top of the illuminated screen reading, "Smart Home Hub Offline." A slight smirk touched the corner of my mouth. They thought they had blinded me by simply unplugging the router in the living room. They had no idea the security system I installed ran on a discrete cellular backup with direct cloud storage. Every second of their intrusion, every word spoken inside that house was already preserved on a remote server. The trap was set before they even realized they were playing a game. "You are trespassing," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly measured. My voice carried through the crisp evening air, calm and unshaken. "It is a family home," Richard retorted, folding his arms across his chest. His posture was rigid, demanding authority he no longer possessed. "And you owe your sister—" "Owe her." The phrase tasted like ash on my tongue. I had spent my entire adolescence shrinking my own life so Haley could take center stage. I paid my own way through college, I built my own credit, I signed the mortgage documents with my own pen. There was no family money tied to the cedar siding or the hardwood floors I spent hours picking out. Instead of stepping toward the porch, I turned my back on them. The silence from the yard spoke louder than any threat I could have screamed. I walked over to the driveway and picked up my overnight suitcase, the only possession I had upon returning from my business trip to Denver. My hand gripped the cold plastic handle. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Haley step out onto the porch, her smug smile faltering just a fraction. She expected a fight. She got a ghost. I turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and cranked the heater to chase the Montana chill from my bones. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood without a second glance backward. As my tires rolled over the asphalt, the transition was instantaneous. I stopped being a daughter. I became a plaintiff. I hit the dial button on my steering wheel. The Bluetooth rang twice before a sharp, authoritative voice filled the cabin. "Logan Pierce speaking." "Logan," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. They changed the locks. Logan was a real estate attorney with a reputation for being a shark in a tailored suit. He handled high-stakes property litigation and had zero tolerance for amateur hour. I could hear the rustle of papers pausing on his end of the line. He did not ask how I felt. He did not ask if I was crying. "Where are you sleeping tonight, Nava?" he asked, his tone shifting into tactical mode. "A hotel," I replied, merging onto the highway as the sun finally dipped behind the Bridger Mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. "I am driving there now." "Do not go back to the property," Logan instructed. "Do not text them, do not engage. I will pull the county records in the morning to see if they filed anything fraudulent to justify the lockout. Have your title insurance policy ready." "I want the police there at first light," I said. My fingers squeezed the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "You will have them," Logan promised. The hotel check-in was a blur of sterile lobbies and synthetic hallway smells. It was a stark contrast to the warm amber lighting and cedar scent of my own home. I swiped the key card to my room, tossed my overnight bag onto the stiff mattress, and walked straight to the window. I looked out over the parking lot, the glowing street lamps illuminating the frost gathering on the car hoods. I did not sleep. I spent the entire night sitting in the stiff armchair by the window, drinking terrible room service coffee, waiting for the sun to rise. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a pale icy pink. I grabbed my coat and drove back to the neighborhood. The frost crunched under my tires as I turned onto my street. The air was biting, sending plumes of white breath from my lips as I parked halfway down the block. The quiet morning was shattered. 3 police cruisers rolled silently around the corner, their red and blue lights flashing rhythmically against the pristine suburban facades. The heavy tires came to a halt right at the curb of my front lawn. Car doors opened, the heavy thud echoing in the stillness. Uniformed officers stepped out, adjusting their utility belts, their boots crunching on the frosted grass as they walked past my discarded clothes toward the front porch. The true fallout was just beginning. I stepped out of my car, the cold morning air biting at my cheeks. The lead officer, a tall man with graying temples and a heavy utility belt, turned toward me as I approached the curb. His breath plumed in the freezing Montana dawn. I introduced myself, handing over my driver's license. The address printed on the plastic perfectly matched the numbers bolted next to the front door of the Craftsman home. I explained the situation in concise, clinical terms. My parents had changed the locks while I was out of town on business, and my sister was occupying the property. I requested an escort to reclaim my home. The officers exchanged a professional glance, nodding, before walking up the paved driveway. They climbed the porch steps, their heavy black boots thudding against the painted wood. The lead officer knocked twice, a firm, commanding sound that echoed down the quiet suburban street. The door opened almost immediately. Richard stood there wearing a thick wool cardigan, holding a ceramic mug of coffee. He looked relaxed, playing the part of the bewildered suburban father interrupted during his morning routine. He widened his eyes, shifting his gaze from the uniformed officers on his porch to me, standing safely behind them on the walkway. "Can I help you, officers?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with practiced polite confusion. My father was always a salesman. In the late 90s, he sold used sedans. Then he moved to insurance and eventually transitioned into whatever temporary grift kept him afloat while my mother worked double shifts at the clinic. He knew exactly how to play a mark. He knew how to lower his voice, soften his posture, and project an aura of harmless cooperation. We received a call regarding an illegal lockout. The lead officer stated, his tone neutral but firm. The caller claims she is the legal owner of this property and that you have denied her entry. Richard let out a soft, patronizing chuckle, shaking his head as if dealing with a confused teenager rather than a 29-year-old financial analyst. He stepped back, gesturing toward the interior of the warm, well-lit foyer. "There must be some misunderstanding," Richard replied smoothly. "My daughter has been going through a rough patch. We are just trying to help her out. But this house does not belong to her anymore. She transferred it to her sister yesterday morning." My heart stalled. Transferred. The word hung in the freezing air. I stepped forward, opening my mouth to call him a liar, but Richard was already reaching into the interior hallway console table. He produced a thick manila folder, slipping out a crisp stack of legal-sized papers. He handed them directly to the lead officer. The officer flipped open the document. I stood close enough to read the bold black font across the top of the page. Quit claim deed. My stomach plummeted. "This is a notarized property transfer," the officer murmured, his eyes scanning the paragraphs of dense legal text. He flipped to the second page. I leaned in my eyes, locking onto the signature line at the bottom. There it was, my name, spelled out in blue ink. The handwriting was a calculated imitation of my own script, mimicking the sharp angles of my signature, but it was too stiff, too forced. Beside the forged signature was a dark official-looking stamp, State of Montana, Notary Public. "That is a forgery," I stated, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I was in Denver all week on a corporate retreat. I have flight records, hotel receipts, and badge swipes to prove it. I never signed that document. I have never seen that document in my life." The lead officer looked at me, then back at the deed, and finally at the notary stamp. He sighed, the sound heavy with bureaucratic resignation. He handed the papers back to Richard, who took them with a subtle, victorious smirk. "Ma'am," the officer said, turning to face me. The tone of his voice had shifted. The protective authority was gone, replaced by a rigid adherence to protocol. "This document is notarized by a state-commissioned official. As far as the law is concerned, this piece of paper indicates a legal transfer of ownership to your sister." "They forged my name," I repeated, maintaining eye contact. "You are looking at a stolen $600,000 asset." "I hear you," the officer replied gently but firmly. "But we are patrol officers, not a judge. We cannot determine fraud on a front porch. Because he holds a notarized deed, this is no longer a trespassing issue. It is a civil matter. We cannot force him to vacate, and we cannot force him to let you inside without a court order." The reality of the American justice system crashed down on me. The law was not designed to protect the truth in real time. It was designed to keep the peace until a courtroom could sort through the wreckage. Right now, the peace meant leaving my abusers inside my sanctuary. I looked past the officers. My spare house keys still lay in the dirt near the street gutter, coated in morning frost and dead leaves. They were a bitter symbol of my sudden displacement. Across the street, Mrs. Gable was still standing behind her living room window, her phone pressed to her ear, undoubtedly broadcasting my humiliation to the rest of the neighborhood. Richard stepped forward, leaning against the doorframe. "You should get some help, Nava," he said, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "We love you, but you cannot keep doing this to the family." The urge to step past the police and strike him was overwhelming. My hands balled into tight fists inside my coat pockets. But I knew the trap. If I raised my voice, if I lunged at him, I would become the hysterical, unstable daughter he was painting me to be. The police would have grounds to remove me in handcuffs. I refused to hand them that victory. "Understood," I told the officer, my voice cold as ice. "I will let my attorneys handle the eviction." I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not look at my keys in the dirt. I did not look at Haley peeking through the upstairs bedroom curtains. I walked straight to my car, got inside, and locked the doors. The drive to the extended stay hotel was a silent blur of gray asphalt and frozen trees. I parked in the designated lot, the generic beige facade of the building, a stark downgrade from the custom wood trim of the home I had bled for. I dragged my overnight suitcase into the lobby, the smell of industrial carpet cleaner stinging my nose. I requested a room for a week, handing over my corporate credit card for the deposit. Once inside the sterile, impersonal hotel room, I did not bother unpacking. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the cheap floral bedspread scratching against my slacks, and pulled my laptop from my bag. I needed to act fast. A forged quitclaim deed was a massive legal hurdle, but it was beatable. Logan would need a heavy retainer to draft the emergency injunction and file the civil lawsuit. I opened my web browser and navigated to my primary banking portal. The screen glowed against my tired eyes. I typed in my credentials, mentally calculating the transfer limit I would need to authorize to get Logan moving by noon. The dashboard loaded, displaying my checking and high-yield savings accounts. I blinked, leaning closer to the screen. The numbers staring back at me made no sense. I refreshed the page, assuming a network error. The screen blinked, reloaded, and displayed the exact same devastating reality. The balance in my primary savings account, the safety net I had meticulously built over 5 years of grueling overtime and calculated investments, was gone. The ledger showed a string of 0 digits. Someone had drained the account dry. The glowing digits on the laptop screen burned into my retinas. $40,000. The sum represented years of skipped vacations, delayed purchases, and ruthless budgeting. Now the ledger displayed a single mocking 0. My lungs seized, trapping the stale hotel air in my chest. I blinked, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes, hoping the sleep deprivation was playing tricks on my vision. When I opened my eyes, the void remained. I did not throw the computer. I did not scream. As a financial analyst, my brain is hardwired to follow the data. Money never truly vanishes. It leaves a digital footprint, a trail of routing numbers and timestamps. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling just enough to make the cursor shake. I clicked on the Transaction History tab. The page loaded, revealing a single outbound wire transfer initiated at 6 in the morning. The destination was an external routing number. I stared at those 9 digits, a creeping sense of dread pooling in my stomach. I recognized that bank code. It belonged to a regional credit union back in my hometown. My mind snapped back a decade. I was 18 years old again, sitting in a cramped bank branch, smelling of stale coffee and Brenda's signature cheap vanilla perfume. I had just secured my first summer internship and needed a place to deposit the paychecks. My mother sat beside me, her hand resting heavily on my shoulder. The loan officer pushed the paperwork across the desk. I hesitated, pen in hand, questioning why her name needed to be on the header. Brenda leaned in close, her voice a sickly sweet whisper near my ear. "Family shares everything, sweetie. Just sign here. In case of an emergency, I can always help you manage things." That distorted audio memory echoed in my head, blending sickeningly into the cold reality of my current zero-balance screen. I had forgotten that joint account even existed. I stopped using it sophomore year of college when I realized Brenda was treating my meager savings like her personal ATM, withdrawing $20 here and $50 there for groceries she never actually bought. I had opened a new private account at a national bank and transferred my direct deposits, but I had never formally closed the old credit union account, assuming the 0 balance meant it was dormant. Brenda had kept it open. She kept the account active like a hidden back door, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She had somehow linked my current high-yield savings to that archaic joint account, initiating an external pull. Because her name was technically on the receiving end, the automated fraud systems did not flag it as suspicious. They were not just petty thieves, they were strategic. They knew I had retained Logan. They knew a high-powered real estate attorney required a heavy retainer to fight a forged deed. My family intended to starve me out. If I could not pay my lawyer, I could not fight the civil case. If I could not fight the civil case, they kept the $600,000 house. I clicked deeper into the old credit union portal, pulling up the recent transaction history of the joint account to see where the $40,000 had gone after Brenda secured it. The funds had bounced into her personal checking, but the PDF statements revealed something far more disturbing. I scrolled past the expected charges, the overpriced restaurants, the department store hauls. Then a peculiar string of line items caught my eye. Highland Consulting. It was a recurring withdrawal. $5,000 on a Tuesday, $3,000 on a Sunday night at 2 in the morning, $10,000 the week prior. My analytical training kicked in, filtering out the panic and replacing it with sharp, cold focus. A legitimate consulting firm does not charge odd amounts in the middle of the night on a weekend. Furthermore, Richard and Brenda ran no businesses. They had no need for consulting services. The transactions were structured to avoid hitting the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, a classic indicator of illicit structuring. My father was bleeding cash to a shadow entity. The theft of my home and my savings was not just driven by Haley-spoiled entitlement. It was driven by a dark, hidden desperation. I could investigate Highland Consulting later. Right now, I was fighting a two-front war, stolen real estate and grand larceny. I needed to cauterize the wound before they bled me dry. I picked up my phone and dialed the priority fraud line for my primary financial institution. The agonizing jazz hold music played through the speaker, each second feeling like an hour. I paced the length of the narrow hotel room, my heels sinking into the cheap industrial carpet. A representative finally answered. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I deployed my corporate tone, sharp and uncompromising. I am a victim of identity theft and unauthorized wire fraud, I stated, reciting my account numbers and security pins before the agent could even ask. I need a hard freeze on all linked checking and savings accounts, suspend all outbound transfers, revoke any external account authorizations immediately. The representative typed rapidly on the other end. I can see the wire transfer from this morning, ma'am. Since it was initiated externally to a verified linked account, the recall process will take time. I understand the regulatory timeline, I replied, my voice tight. Just lock the gates. Do not let another dime leave this institution. Next, I dialed my brokerage firm, locking down my stock portfolio and retirement accounts. I called the 3 major credit bureaus, placing a strict fraud alert on my Social Security number to ensure Richard could not open any new credit cards in my name. I was a financial analyst. Securing assets was my specific area of expertise. They had caught me off guard with the backdoor transfer, but I was building a fortress they would never breach again. I ended the final call with my corporate credit card issuer, ensuring my business expenses were shielded. I tossed the phone onto the scratchy floral bedspread and sank into the desk chair. The immediate financial hemorrhage was stopped. I had zero liquid cash for the moment, but my investments and credit were safe. I took a deep, shaky breath, reaching for the plastic cup of stale water on the nightstand. I needed to call Logan back. I needed to explain that my retainer payment would be delayed by a few days while the bank investigated the wire fraud. Before my fingers could grasp the plastic cup, the phone on the bed vibrated. A sharp, distinct chime cut through the quiet room. I glanced over. The screen lit up with a notification from Facebook. Then it chimed again. And again. The phone began to vibrate continuously, dancing across the quilt as a barrage of alerts flooded the lock screen. 10 notifications. 20, 50. I frowned, setting the water down. I rarely use social media, maintaining a private profile for distant relatives and former college classmates. I picked up the device, unlocking the screen. The notifications were a relentless stream of tags, shares, and direct messages. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the application. At the very top of my feed was a video. It had been posted by Brenda just 30 minutes ago and was already accumulating hundreds of comments and shares. The thumbnail showed my mother sitting at her kitchen table, my kitchen table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I tapped the screen. The video began to play. Brenda looked directly into the camera lens. Her makeup was artfully smudged, giving her the appearance of a shattered, heartbroken matriarch. The lighting was carefully angled to highlight her tears. I did not want to do this publicly, Brenda's voice trembled through my phone speaker, thick with rehearsed sorrow. But we need to protect our community. My daughter Nava has been hiding a dark secret from all of us. I stared at the screen, paralyzed, as my mother began to spin a web of lies so vast and damaging, it threatened to destroy the only thing I had left. Brenda dabbed at the corner of her dry eye with a crumpled tissue, looking directly into the camera lens. Her voice trembled with a precision that only came from years of practice. I did not want to do this publicly, my mother whispered, pausing to let a fake sob catch in her throat. But we need to protect our community. My daughter Nava has been hiding a dark secret from all of us. I sat frozen on the edge of the stiff hotel mattress, the harsh white glow of the phone screen illuminating the dim room. The volume was low, but every word felt like a physical strike. Brenda spun a narrative so distorted it belonged in a fiction novel. She claimed I was battling severe substance dependency. She told the camera that my recent business trips were actually stints in luxury rehabilitation centers funded by money I had siphoned from her and Richard. She looked down, shaking her head in theatrical sorrow, and stated I had emptied their retirement accounts and abandoned them to face foreclosure. My chest tightened. The projection was staggering. My parents had just stolen my property through a forged deed and drained $40,000 from my bank account to fund Richard and his shadowy Highland consulting debts. Yet here was Brenda sitting in my kitchen, wearing a sorrowful expression, painting herself as the destitute victim of my imaginary crimes. She was using my own stolen house as a movie set to destroy my reputation. Bozeman is a growing city, but at its core it still operates like a small town. Reputations are built over decades and can be dismantled in an afternoon. I spent 5 years establishing myself as a senior financial analyst, managing portfolios for local business owners, ranchers, and medical professionals. Trust was my primary currency. Brenda knew this. She aimed her weapon directly at the foundation of my livelihood, striking where I was most vulnerable. I scrolled down to the comments section. The engagement numbers were climbing at a terrifying rate. 200 shares, 500 likes. I recognized the names of the people commenting. The owner of the bakery where I bought my morning coffee wrote a paragraph offering prayers for my parents. A local contractor I had hired last year to redo my patio expressed his disgust, stating he always knew something was wrong with me. The community was turning against me in real time, fed by a diet of rehearsed tears and fabricated trauma. A sharp buzz against my palm pulled my attention away from the social media feed. A text message banner dropped down from the top of the screen. The sender was Aunt Barbara, my mother's older sister. Barbara lived 3 towns over and sent me a birthday card every September. We had shared Thanksgiving dinners for 20 years. I tapped the notification. The message was short, brutal, and devoid of any inquiry into my well-being. You are a monster, Nava. After everything your parents sacrificed to raise you, leaving them bankrupt for your selfish habits is unforgivable. Do not ever contact this side of the family again. The words blurred slightly as a hot flush of betrayal crept up my neck. Barbara did not ask for my side of the story. She did not call to ask if the accusations were true. She swallowed the lies whole, eager to participate in the collective outrage. It was a harsh reminder of my childhood, where Brenda always controlled the narrative at family gatherings, painting my quiet, introverted nature as aloofness or disrespect. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard. I drafted a response to Barbara, my thumbs pressing so hard the glass screen flexed. I typed out the truth. I explained the forged quitclaim deed, the stolen $40,000, the illegal lockout. I wanted to attach screenshots of my drained bank accounts. I wanted to post the police report number in the public comment section of Brenda viral video. The urge to scream my innocence into the digital void was overwhelming. Before I hit send, I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. My lungs expanded, pulling in the stale, recycled air of the hotel room. I deleted the draft to Barbara. I closed the social media application. Instead, I dialed Logan Pierce. My attorney answered on the first ring, the background noise of a busy law office filtering through the speaker. Have you seen the Facebook video? I asked, keeping my tone as clinical as possible, refusing to let him hear the tremor in my voice. I have it playing on my monitor right now, Logan replied, his voice calm and unbothered. It is a bold move. They are trying to get ahead of the fallout. I need to release a statement, I said, pacing the narrow strip of carpet between the bed and the television stand. I have the flight records proving I was in Denver. I have the bank statements showing the unauthorized transfer. I can prove she is lying right now. Do not post a single word, Logan commanded, his tone sharpening into a strict legal directive. They are destroying my reputation in my own city, I countered, my jaw clenching until my teeth ached. My aunt just disowned me via text. Local vendors are calling me a thief. Let them, Logan said. Radio silence is your best weapon, Nava. When you argue with them online, you validate their narrative by participating in the drama. You reduce a felony fraud case to a petty family feud. I stopped pacing, staring at the blank hotel room wall. "Listen to me carefully," Logan continued. "We want them to feel victorious. We want them to think you are too ashamed or too scared to fight back. When criminals feel safe, they get sloppy. They make mistakes. They leave trails. Let your mother enjoy her online sympathy today. By the time we file the injunction and serve the subpoenas, those digital footprints will be the very evidence we use to prove defamation and malicious intent in front of a judge. Do not engage." I swallowed the bitter pill of his logic. "You are the attorney," I murmured. "I will stay quiet." "Good," Logan said. "Try to get some rest. We have a lot of paperwork to draft tomorrow." The call disconnected. I tossed the phone onto the cheap floral bedspread. The logic was sound, but the emotional toll was heavy. Remaining silent while being publicly crucified required a level of discipline that tested every fiber of my professional training. I walked into the cramped hotel bathroom, turning on the faucet to splash cold water on my face. The face staring back at me in the mirror was pale, the dark circles under my eyes a testament to the sheer exhaustion of the past 24 hours. I dried my face with a scratchy towel and walked back into the bedroom. I needed sleep. I needed to let my brain rest so I could face the legal battle ahead with a clear mind. As I reached for the lamp switch, my phone illuminated again. This time, it was not a social media notification or a text message from a misguided relative. It was a high-priority email alert from my corporate firm server. The distinct blue icon signaled an internal communication. I picked up the device, my brow furrowing. It was past 9 o'clock at night. Financial firms rarely sent internal emails at this hour unless there was a critical market failure or a significant internal crisis. I opened the secure mail application. The sender was Diane, the Director of Human Resources. Diane was a stern, brilliant woman who had championed my promotion just weeks prior. The subject line was written in bold, unforgiving capital letters: "Urgent disciplinary review required." My pulse, which had finally started to settle, accelerated back to a frantic rhythm. I tapped the screen to load the full message. "Naava," the email read, "it has come to the attention of the Executive Board that a deeply concerning video regarding your personal conduct and financial integrity is currently circulating within the local community. Given the nature of our business and the fiduciary duties we hold for our clients, these public accusations present a severe liability to the firm reputation." The words blurred together as panic began to claw at my throat. I read the final paragraph, my breath catching in my chest. "You are required to attend an emergency meeting in my office tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Be prepared to discuss your future at this company." The social media firestorm had just crossed a fatal line. My family had not merely stolen my house and my savings. They had breached the walls of my professional life, threatening the very career I needed to survive. My name is Naava Wilson. The morning sun reflected harshly off the glass facade of the downtown Bozeman Financial Center. I sat in my parked car, watching my breath fog the windshield. The digital clock on the dashboard read 7:45. My stomach twisted into a tight knot, a physical reaction to the dread pooling in my chest. For 5 years, this building represented my sanctuary. It was the one place where logic ruled, where numbers always balanced, and where my family's chaotic dysfunction could not reach me. Today, the pristine glass felt like a cage. Before we step into that boardroom, I have a question for you. Have you ever had a trusted mentor turn their back on you when you needed them most? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel for more stories about taking back your power and fighting corporate betrayal. I stepped out into the freezing air, pulling my wool coat tighter around my shoulders. My heels clicked a steady, rhythmic march across the concrete plaza. Pushing through the revolving doors, the familiar scent of artisanal espresso and expensive cologne washed over me. I approached the security turnstile, pulling my plastic identification badge from my purse. I pressed the magnetic strip against the scanner. A sharp, discordant beep echoed through the lobby. The light flashed crimson red. Access denied. My pulse quickened. The security guard, a man I had exchanged pleasantries with every morning for 3 years, averted his eyes. He reached under his desk and triggered the manual override, allowing the glass gate to swing open, but his silence spoke volumes. The contagion had already spread. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like an eternity. The polished metal doors slid open, revealing the hushed, carpeted corridors of the executive wing. I bypassed my own cubicle, ignoring the averted glances of my colleagues, and walked directly toward the Human Resources Department.
Diane was waiting for me.
She sat behind her broad mahogany desk, her hands folded neatly over a closed manila folder. Diane was 55, possessed a brilliant mind for corporate strategy, and always wore immaculate navy suits. She had personally recruited me out of the junior pool, grooming me for the senior analyst position. I respected her deeply. That made the cold, detached expression on her face all the more devastating. "Close the door, Nava," she instructed, her tone devoid of its usual warmth. I pushed the heavy oak door shut and the click of the latch sealing us inside the soundproof room. I sat in the rigid leather chair opposite her, keeping my spine perfectly straight. I refused to let my exhaustion show. "An email arrived in the executive inbox at 4 o'clock this morning," Diane began, her eyes locking onto mine with surgical precision. "It was sent from an encrypted, anonymous server. However, the contents were entirely public. It contained a link to a social media broadcast featuring your mother alongside a detailed message outlining allegations of substance abuse, financial elder exploitation, and severe mental instability." Haley. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Brenda lacked the technical proficiency to mask an IP address or set up an encrypted routing protocol. My sister, however, spent her college years navigating the dark corners of the internet. Haley had bypassed my personal boundaries and aimed a targeted strike directly at my corporate livelihood, ensuring the board of directors saw the smeared fabrication before I could even clock in. "Diane," I started, my voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Those claims are entirely fictitious. I am currently the victim of a coordinated property theft and wire fraud scheme orchestrated by my own relatives. I have retained legal counsel to fight a forged quitclaim deed." Diane held up a single, perfectly manicured hand, demanding silence. "I understand you are navigating a complex personal crisis, but you also understand the nature of our industry. We manage hundreds of millions of dollars in generational wealth. Our clients trust us because we project absolute, unimpeachable stability. A senior analyst accused of draining her parents' retirement funds to fuel a secret addiction is a catastrophic public relations liability." The words stung, burning through my professional armor. "I am innocent," I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "My financial records are spotless. You have seen my portfolio yields. You know my character." "I know the woman who works in this office," Diane corrected, her voice softening just a fraction, revealing a brief glimpse of pity. Pity was infinitely worse than anger. "But corporate policy does not operate on personal affection. The board views this as an unacceptable risk. We cannot have your name attached to client accounts while this digital circus plays out in the local community." She unclasped her hands and picked up the manila folder. With a slow, deliberate motion, she slid the paperwork across the polished mahogany surface. The thick paper hissed against the wood, stopping exactly at the edge of the desk. "Effective immediately, you are placed on unpaid administrative leave, pending a comprehensive internal investigation." Diane stated, retreating back into her clinical corporate persona, "You must surrender your badge, your company laptop, and your security tokens. You are barred from contacting clients or accessing internal networks." My fingers felt numb. The cold, disappointing slide of that suspension document severed my last remaining lifeline. I had endured the lockout. I had survived the theft of my savings. I drew my strength from my career, relying on my paycheck to fund the legal war I was about to wage. Now my family had successfully severed my income. They were systematically dismantling my entire existence, leaving me isolated and starving. "How long do I have to clear my name?" I asked, staring at the signature line, demanding my immediate compliance. "You have 14 days, Diane replied. "If you cannot provide a certified police report citing felony fraud and a judicial injunction proving your innocence by the end of the month, the board will terminate your contract with cause." I did not argue. Arguing with bureaucracy was a waste of precious oxygen. I uncapped my pen, signed the document, and placed my plastic identification badge on top of it. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt, and walked out of the office without another word. The walk back to my car was a blur of righteous fury. The initial shock evaporated, replaced by a burning, singular focus. 15 days. I did not have weeks to let the slow gears of the civil courts turn. I needed undeniable, concrete proof of the forgery immediately. I needed to force the hands of the police, bypass the civil deadlock, and secure a criminal indictment. I climbed into my vehicle, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. I bypassed the highway, weaving aggressively through the morning commuter traffic, heading straight for the boutique law firm handling my case. My tires screeched slightly as I pulled into the visitor parking lot. I threw the transmission into park, grabbed my purse, and marched toward the entrance. The reception area of the firm was an exercise in minimalist wealth, featuring stark white walls and leather seating. I ignored the paralegal asking if I had an appointment, pushing past the glass partition and striding directly toward the corner office. I pushed the door open. Logan was standing behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of legal briefs. The aggressive, confident shark demeanor he usually projected was entirely absent. He looked pale, his brow furrowed deeply as he stared intently at his computer monitor. "Logan," I demanded, stepping into the room, "we need to accelerate the timeline. My firm just placed me on unpaid leave. I need an injunction today or I lose my career." Logan did not look up. He did not offer his usual sharp retort. Instead, he slowly rotated his monitor so the screen faced my direction. "Nava, shut the door," he commanded, his voice tight, lacking any of its usual professional detachment. I complied, the heavy oak clicking shut behind me. I walked around the desk, my eyes scanning the digitized document displayed on the glowing screen. "I pulled the county clerk records first thing this morning to review the forged quitclaim deed," Logan explained, pointing to the secondary file attached to the digital folder. "But I found an addendum filed yesterday afternoon. Your father did not just transfer the title of the property to your sister." I leaned closer, reading the dense legal jargon at the top of the newly discovered document. My blood ran completely cold. "He leveraged the equity," Logan continued, his finger tracing a line of text indicating a massive financial encumbrance. "Richard used the forged deed to establish collateral. He authorized a $300,000 commercial lien against the property, securing the funds through a federal emergency loan program under your stolen Social Security number." The room spun. This was no longer a petty civil dispute over a suburban house. It was not just grand larceny of $40,000. By involving a federal lending agency and transmitting fraudulent applications across state lines using my identity, my family had crossed a terrifying threshold. They had unwittingly attached my name to a massive scheme involving government funds. This was federal identity fraud, and I was the primary suspect. The glowing pixels on Logan's monitor blurred together as my brain attempted to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. I was a financial analyst. I built my entire career on identifying risk, calculating exposure, and securing assets. Yet sitting in that pristine corner office, I realized I had completely miscalculated the baseline depravity of my own blood. Have you ever discovered that the people who raised you were quietly engineering your destruction behind your back? Share your experience in the comments and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel as I take you through every brutal step of my retaliation. Logan tapped his expensive pen against the mahogany desk, breaking the suffocating silence. He pulled up the digital addendum, highlighting a dense block of financial jargon. "It is a home equity line of credit," he explained, his tone completely stripped of its usual reassuring warmth. $200,000. They did not just secure a federal emergency loan, they layered it. They used your immaculate credit history to open a massive line of credit against the property equity right before they filed the fraudulent quitclaim deed. My chest constricted. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely too thin to breathe. A HELOC required extensive underwriting, rigorous identity verification, and a mountain of sworn signatures. You cannot simply walk into a lending institution and borrow $250,000 on a house you do not own. The bank would have demanded to see the primary title holder in person. They would have required a state commission notary to witness the ink drying on the contract. How I managed to whisper, my throat raw and tight. How did they bypass the identity checks? Logan clicked his mouse, zooming in on the bottom right corner of the scanned document. The screen magnified a dark, circular stamp pressed over a signature line. The ink was slightly faded, but the name inside the official state seal was perfectly legible. The signature itself was a sloppy, hurried scrawl, a series of lazy loops that looked entirely too familiar. Travis Vance. The sickening realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Travis was Haley's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He was a man who reeked of cheap body spray and unearned confidence. He spent his 20s jumping from one failed multi-level marketing scheme to the next, constantly searching for a shortcut to wealth. Last year, he managed to pass the exam to become a notary public, a credential he primarily used to legitimize shady vehicle titles at a dilapidated used car lot on the edge of town. He backdated the paperwork I stated, the puzzle pieces snapping together in my mind with terrifying clarity. He notarized the HELOC documents to make it appear as though I signed them days before the property was transferred to Haley. Logan nodded grimly. It is a textbook criminal conspiracy. Richard orchestrated the loan, Brenda manipulated the banking transfers, Haley provided the fake title, and Travis supplied the legal cover. They turned your own equity into liquid cash, and because your name is on the origination documents, you are completely liable for the debt. I pressed the heels of my hands against my temples, trying to stop the room from spinning. The financial implications were catastrophic. I was already suspended from my firm. I had zero income. Now I was legally on the hook for a massive fraudulent loan, racking up daily interest I could never hope to pay. But it gets worse, Logan continued, turning the monitor off and leaning forward. The lender holding this debt is a ruthless national syndicate. If their internal risk department discovers there is a title dispute, or if they get a whiff of identity fraud before federal investigators officially freeze the asset, they will panic. What does that mean? I asked, dropping my hands to my lap. It means they will invoke the acceleration clause, Logan replied. They will not wait for a judge to sort out who actually owns the home. They will declare the loan in default due to fraudulent activity and initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. They will seize the property, auction it off to recoup their $200,000, and leave you holding the remaining balance. You are fighting a war on two fronts now. If we alert the bank too early, you lose the house permanently. If we wait too long, the family drains the rest of the credit line and vanishes. I needed leverage. I needed something tangible to break the stalemate before the bank tore my sanctuary down to the studs. Civil courts moved at a glacial pace, and I did not have months to wait for subpoenas to clear. I needed a confession. I needed the weakest link in their criminal chain to snap. Travis was the weak link. He was arrogant, greedy, and fundamentally cowardly. He did not possess the cold, calculating cruelty of my father or the manipulative endurance of my mother. If I pressed him hard enough, he would fold to save his own skin. I left Logan's office with a singular, dangerous objective. I knew exactly where to find Travis. He conducted most of his so-called business deals from a vinyl booth at a greasy diner just off the interstate, a place where the coffee tasted like burnt copper and the patrons preferred to be left alone. I navigated the icy streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The afternoon sky was already beginning to darken, casting long, menacing shadows across the snow-banked roads. I pulled into the diner parking lot, intentionally parking my sedan near the back by the overflowing dumpsters. I scanned the rows of vehicles until I spotted it, a lifted, excessively loud pickup truck with aftermarket tires and a cracked windshield. Travis was here. I turned off the engine and the sudden silence in the cabin deafening. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and opened the voice recording application. I tapped the red circle, watching the digital timer begin to count upward. I slipped the device into the deep exterior pocket of my wool coat, ensuring the microphone was exposed just enough to capture the audio. I did not need a full written confession. I just needed him to admit on tape that he backdated the notary seal. That single piece of evidence would be enough to bring the police to his doorstep and force a grand jury indictment. I stepped out into the biting wind, the cold slicing through my layers. I walked toward the front entrance, my boots crunching softly on the salted pavement. Just as I reached the corner of the building, the heavy glass door swung open. The harsh fluorescent light from inside the diner spilled out into the twilight. Travis stepped out, zipping up a cheap leather jacket. He had a toothpick wedged between his teeth and was staring down at his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. He looked exactly as I remembered, perpetually projecting an unearned sense of superiority. "Travis," I called out, stepping into his path. He stopped, his head snapping up. For a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across his eyes. He quickly masked it with a broad, arrogant smile, pocketing his phone and shifting his weight. "Nava," he drawled, his voice thick with false bravado. "Look at you. Heard you were having a rough week. Haley mentioned you decided to take a little vacation from reality." I ignored the bait. I kept my distance, standing near the driver's side door of a rusted sedan, ensuring I had a clear path back to my own car. "I saw the documents, Travis," I stated, keeping my voice even, devoid of any emotion. "I saw the HELOC paperwork. I know you stamped it. I also know I was in Denver the day you claimed to witness my signature." The smirk vanished from his face. He spat the toothpick onto the concrete, his posture stiffening. "I do not know what you are talking about," he muttered, glancing nervously around the empty parking lot. "You committed federal identity fraud," I pushed, taking a calculated step forward to keep him engaged. "The FBI does not look kindly on state-commissioned officials participating in wire fraud. When they audit your ledger, you are going to federal prison. Tell me Richard forced you to do it, and I will leave your name out of the initial police report." Travis did not fold. Instead, his eyes darkened. The cowardly hesitation I expected evaporated, replaced by a sudden, predatory aggression. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, his heavy boots echoing like gunshots against the pavement. Before I could react, he shoved me hard against the side of the rusted sedan. The freezing metal bit into my shoulder blades. He planted his hands on the roof of the car on either side of my head, caging me in. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and cheap diner grease. "You listen to me," Travis hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that sent a spike of pure terror straight into my chest. "You are not going to the police. You are going to keep your mouth shut, take the loss, and walk away. Because if you ever come near me or your sister again, losing your house is going to be the absolute least of your problems." My name is Nava Wilson. The freezing metal of the rusted sedan bit sharply through my wool coat as Travis pressed his weight against my shoulders. He had me caged in the dim parking lot of the diner, his heavy arms acting as a physical barricade between me and any chance of escape. Before we dive into how far a cornered rat will go to protect a lie, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had to rely entirely on your own survival instinct when someone twice your size tried to intimidate you? Tell me your story in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel for more true stories about outsmarting absolute betrayal. Travis leaned closer, the harsh neon lights of the diner buzzing faintly behind him. He reeked of cheap domestic beer and stale tobacco. He grew up in the shadow of 2 older brothers who were local high school football legends, men who eventually drank themselves into complete obscurity. Travis inherited their natural aggression, but possessed absolutely none of their athletic talent or charm. He learned at a very young age that fear was a highly effective, incredibly cheap substitute for genuine respect. He used physical intimidation to mask his sheer incompetence. I knew this because my sister used to complain about his explosive temper tantrums when they first started dating. She thought his volatile nature meant he was passionate and protective. I knew it just meant he was profoundly pathetic. "You really think you can walk up to me and rattle my cage?" Travis hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing, gravelly whisper. I did not break eye contact. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my exterior remained entirely composed. I was a senior financial analyst. I spent my days managing massive corporate crises and mitigating catastrophic losses. I refused to let a corrupt small-town notary public see me sweat. My right hand was buried deep inside my coat pocket, my thumb hovering protectively over the phone screen to ensure the audio recording application was still capturing every single word. "I think you stamped a federal document without the primary title holder present," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly even and utterly devoid of fear. "I think you backdated a $250,000 loan to help Richard steal my equity." Travis laughed, a short, ugly sound that puffed a cloud of white condensation into the icy air between us. "And who is going to prove that?" he mocked, shifting his weight to press me harder against the vehicle door. "Your sister holds the physical deed. Your parents control the equity line. You have a suspended corporate badge and a cheap hotel room. You are completely broke, Nava." He reached into his leather jacket with one hand, pulling out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He brought one to his lips, struck a cheap plastic lighter, and inhaled deeply. The glowing red ember illuminated the cruel satisfaction dancing in his eyes. "Drop the civil suit, Nava," he demanded, blowing a stream of acrid smoke directly into my face. I stamped a piece of paper. "What your family did with that paper is their problem entirely. But if you try to drag my state commission into a federal courtroom, I will personally ensure you never work in Montana again." I needed one more push. I needed him to solidify his absolute complicity on the digital recording. "You admit you falsified the date for them?" I asked, letting my voice waver just a fraction, feigning the exact desperation he desperately wanted to hear. "I did what I had to do to get paid," Travis sneered, taking another long drag. "Your father offered me $5,000 to make the notary problem disappear. I solved the problem. You need to accept your loss and walk away, right now." He pulled the cigarette from his mouth and casually flicked it through the air. The burning cylinder landed directly on the pristine hood of my parked sedan a few feet away. Bright orange sparks scattered across the dark paint. It was a calculated microaggression, a blatant display designed to establish physical dominance and invoke sheer terror. "Next time," he warned softly, "it will not be just a cigarette burning your property." I had what I needed. The trap had successfully snapped shut. "You win, Travis," I whispered, shrinking my shoulders inward to complete the illusion of total defeat. "I will drop the lawsuit tomorrow morning. Just let me go." The triumphant smirk returned to his face. He stepped back, dropping his arms and clearing the path. I did not run. Running would trigger his predatory instinct. I walked slowly to my vehicle, unlocked the driver's side door, and slid into the cold leather seat. I hit the central locking button immediately, the mechanical thud echoing loudly in the quiet cabin. I started the engine, threw the transmission into reverse, and backed out of the parking lot without ever looking at him again. The drive back to the extended stay hotel was a silent, intense blur. The massive surge of adrenaline slowly began to recede, leaving my limbs feeling heavy and bruised. I parked in the designated lot, the generic beige facade of the building looking strangely comforting after the sheer hostility of the diner parking lot. I hurried inside, locking the deadbolt of my room before finally pulling the phone from my pocket. I pressed stop on the recording application and tapped play. The audio quality was astonishingly clear. The microphone had perfectly captured the ambient buzz of the neon sign, the aggressive crunch of his boots, and most importantly, his explicit confession. "I did what I had to do to get paid. Your father offered me $5,000 to make the notary problem disappear." I sank onto the edge of the stiff hotel mattress, letting out a long, shuddering breath. I had the smoking gun. This single audio file elevated the situation from a convoluted civil property dispute into a slam-dunk criminal indictment for federal wire fraud and conspiracy. But I could not hand it over to the authorities just yet. The bank holding the fraudulent credit line was still a massive looming threat. If the police knocked on my parents' front door tonight, Richard would panic, empty the remaining credit line, and completely vanish with the cash before the asset freeze could take effect. I needed to buy Logan enough time to draft the emergency injunction and secure the federal hold. I needed to lull my family into a deeply false sense of security. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing harshly in the dim room. Bullies and thieves share a common psychological flaw. They are intrinsically greedy, and they always expect their victims to eventually surrender. If they thought I was still fighting a high-stakes legal war for the house, they would remain hyper-vigilant. But if I convinced them I was completely broken, desperate for pocket change, and willing to accept their new reality, they would drop their guard entirely. I opened my email client and drafted a new message, adding Richard, Brenda, and Haley to the recipient list. I typed the subject line with careful precision: formal demand for rent. The strategy was a classic legal red herring. I began typing the body of the email, adopting the pathetic, defeated tone of a woman who had completely given up the fight for her stolen property. I wrote that, due to my recent suspension from the financial firm and my total lack of liquid assets, I could no longer afford to fight the property transfer in civil court. I explicitly stated that I was willing to temporarily recognize Haley as the current occupant of the home, provided she paid standard market rent to help me cover my basic living expenses. I demanded $2,000 a month, effective immediately, to resolve the matter privately and avoid further public embarrassment. It was a brilliantly humiliating distraction. To my family, this email would read like a white flag of surrender. It validated their theft in their own minds. It made it look as though I had accepted the forged quitclaim deed as an unbreakable reality and was simply begging for a monthly allowance to survive. It fed their massive egos perfectly. I attached a generic digital payment link, reviewed the text one last time, and hit send. I closed the laptop and walked over to the small window staring out at the frozen parking lot. The waiting game was agonizing. 10 minutes passed, then 30. The silence in the hotel room was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the miniature refrigerator. An hour later, the trap produced a reaction, but it was far more violent than I ever anticipated. A sudden, explosive pounding shattered the quiet atmosphere of the room. The cheap wooden door rattled violently in its frame, the hinges groaning under the immense force. Someone was kicking the base of the door with heavy, relentless strikes. "Open this door right now!" a shrill, hysterical voice screamed from the hallway, echoing loudly enough to wake the entire floor. It was Haley. She was not gloating, she was completely unhinged. I stood frozen in the center of the room, my pulse skyrocketing as the violent banging escalated into a chaotic, terrifying frenzy. My name is Nava Wilson. The relentless, violent pounding against my cheap hotel room door reverberated through my chest, drowning out the low hum of the miniature refrigerator. Fear is a fascinating human emotion. It strips away every layer of societal conditioning and exposes the raw, ugly truth hiding beneath our polite facades. Before I unlock this door and face the chaos waiting on the other side, I have a question for my listeners. Have you ever watched someone who spent their entire life bullying you completely unravel the moment they faced a real consequence? Share your darkest moments of vindication in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel for more stories about dismantling toxic family empires piece by piece. The heavy strikes against the wood escalated. The flimsy metal hinges groaned in protest. I did not rush. I maintained a deliberate, measured pace as I walked across the stained industrial carpet. I reached for the brass deadbolt, my fingers cool and steady, and turned the latch. The heavy wooden barrier violently swung inward. Haley practically fell into the room, her forward momentum carrying her past the threshold. She caught herself on the edge of the television stand, gasping for breath. The smug, victorious aura she paraded around my front lawn yesterday had completely vanished. She looked utterly deranged. Her normally immaculate blonde hair was tangled and plastered to her forehead with cold sweat. The expensive designer mascara she always wore was smeared underneath her eyes, leaving dark, chaotic streaks down her pale cheeks. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Haley shrieked, her voice cracking as she spun around to face me. She reached into her oversized leather handbag, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her car keys onto the floor. I stood near the open doorway, my posture rigid, observing her meltdown with the detached, analytical precision of a scientist studying a volatile chemical reaction. "You received my email regarding the rental agreement," I stated, keeping my tone flat and devoid of any provocation. Haley pulled a crumpled stack of legal documents from her bag and hurled them onto the stiff, floral bedspread. $2,000 a month, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the paper. "We do not have $2,000. We do not have anything. You are going to sign this actual deed right now, Nava." I glanced at the papers scattered across the mattress. It was a fresh quitclaim deed, completely blank on the signature line. The trap I set had worked perfectly, but the resulting explosion was revealing a completely different landscape of destruction. Travis had undoubtedly called Richard the moment I drove away from the diner, warning my father that the forged notary stamp was compromised. Panic had set in. They realized the fake title could trigger a federal investigation threatening the massive credit line they just opened. They needed my genuine, uncontested signature immediately to cure the title defect and secure their stolen cash. "You stole my house," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "You stole my savings. You filed a fraudulent home equity line of credit under my social security number, and now you want me to willingly hand over the physical title because your corrupt notary got scared?" Haley let out a guttural sound of pure frustration, grabbing handfuls of her own hair. "You do not understand what is happening," she sobbed, her entire body vibrating with manic energy. "This is not about the house anymore. This is about keeping our father alive." The words hung in the sterile hotel air. My analytical mind froze, abruptly recalibrating the entire equation. I crossed my arms, demanding an explanation without uttering a single syllable. Haley collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, the fight rapidly draining from her limbs. Highland Consulting is not a real business, she confessed, the words tumbling from her mouth in a frantic, desperate rush. It is a front. It is a local sports betting syndicate running illegal books out of the industrial park. Richard owes them money, a lot of money. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. The bizarre late-night withdrawals from the joint bank account, the $40,000 vanished into thin air, the sheer audacity of executing a massive federal identity theft scheme right under my nose. My family was not just greedy, they were drowning. He placed massive wagers on college athletic tournaments last season. Haley continued her chest heaving as tears spilled over her eyelashes. He lost everything. He took out private loans from the syndicate to cover the losses, and he lost that money too. They told him they were going to start breaking bones if he did not produce $250,000 by the end of the month. I stared at the woman sitting on my temporary bed. Haley was 26 years old. Our parents had spent her entire existence shielding her from accountability, providing endless soft landings every time she failed. Now, the protective bubble had violently burst, exposing her to the lethal, unforgiving reality of the criminal underworld. For a fraction of a second, I witnessed genuine, unfiltered terror in her eyes. The mask of entitlement slipped entirely, revealing a frightened, pathetic child who realized the monsters lurking in the dark were absolutely real. That fleeting moment of profound sisterly pity flickered in my chest. Then Haley wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve and looked up at me. Her expression hardened, the manipulative venom returning to her features with sickening speed. "You have to sign the deed, Nava," she demanded, her tone shifting from desperate confession back to toxic entitlement. "The bank is asking questions about the title transfer. If they freeze the credit line before the wire transfer clears to the bookies, those men are going to kill him. You have a corporate job. You can rebuild your credit. You can buy another house. But he is our father. You cannot let him die over a piece of property." The audacity of her demands snuffed out my pity, instantly replacing it with a cold, impenetrable armor. She was asking me to legitimize a federal felony, accept a catastrophic financial burden, and permanently destroy my own future to shield a man who had intentionally thrown me to the wolves. I walked over to the bed, picked up the blank quitclaim deed, and ripped it directly down the middle. The sharp tearing sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Haley gasped, recoiling as if I had struck her across the face. "I will not light myself on fire to keep your criminals warm," I declared, dropping the shredded paper onto the carpet at her feet. "Your father made his wagers. He can pay his own debts. Get out of my room." "You are a monster," Haley spat, rising from the mattress, her fists clenched at her sides. I pointed toward the open hallway. "Walk out that door right now, or I am calling the police and having you arrested for trespassing and harassment." Haley glared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She snatched her purse from the chair, scooped up her car keys, and stomped toward the exit. She paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. "You just signed his death warrant," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. I slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt and securing the secondary chain latch. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood alone in the center of the room, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. I walked into the bathroom, splashed freezing water onto my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I had drawn the absolute hardest boundary of my life. I had severed the final emotional cord binding me to my abusers. I turned off the harsh overhead lights and crawled into the stiff hotel bed. Sleep was an impossible concept, but I forced my eyes closed, attempting to rest my mind for the legal battles awaiting me at dawn. Hours passed in a state of restless purgatory. The digital clock on the bedside table cast a dim red glow across the room. 2:14 in the morning. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden nightstand, the harsh ringtone shattering the quiet darkness. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my throat. I grabbed the device, squinting at the bright screen. The caller identification displayed a familiar name. Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor from across the street. I swiped the screen to answer, pressing the speaker to my ear. "Mrs. Gable," I answered, my voice rough with fatigue. "Naava," the elderly woman whispered. Her voice was trembling uncontrollably, accompanied by the distinct sound of frantic static. "Naava, you need to call the police immediately." "What is happening?" I demanded, throwing the blankets aside and swinging my legs over the edge of the mattress. "There are men at your house," Mrs. Gable cried, her panic bleeding through the digital connection. "4 dark vehicles just pulled onto the lawn. They are carrying baseball bats. They just smashed through your beautiful front windows. I can hear them screaming your father's name." The voice of my elderly neighbor trembled through the digital connection, her frantic words punctuated by the undeniable sound of shattering glass echoing in the background. My blood ran completely cold. I instructed Mrs. Gable to lock her doors, stay away from her windows, and hang up immediately. I disconnected the call and dialed emergency services, my fingers rigid as I tapped the screen. I recited my address to the dispatcher with robotic precision, stating there was an active home invasion in progress. "My name is Naava Wilson. Before I describe the sheer devastation of watching my physical sanctuary get ripped apart by the criminal underworld, I have a question for you. Have you ever watched a cornered animal destroy everything around it just to survive another day? Leave your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel to support stories about absolute resilience." I dressed in the dark, throwing a heavy wool sweater over my pajamas and sliding my bare feet into my winter boots. The drive from the extended stay hotel to my neighborhood was a blur of adrenaline and icy roads. I did not care about the speed limits. I pushed my sedan to its mechanical limits, the engine roaring through the sleeping suburban streets. I turned the final corner into my cul-de-sac and slammed on the brakes. My tires skated across a patch of black ice, bringing the vehicle to a jarring halt near the community mailbox. The flashing red and blue lights of 3 police cruisers painted the surrounding snowbanks in chaotic, rotating colors. I stepped out of the car, the biting Montana wind whipping my hair across my face. The visual waiting for me at the end of the street was a masterclass in targeted destruction. My beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman home, the physical manifestation of my entire professional career, looked like a war zone. The syndicate did not send loud, brawling thugs. They sent a professional fixer. The destruction was terrifyingly systematic, designed to inflict maximum financial damage in minimum time. Every single custom pane of glass across the front facade had been systematically bashed inward. The heavy wooden front door, which I had spent a month sanding and staining by hand, was splintered off its heavy brass hinges, hanging awkwardly in the frame. The manicured front landscaping was completely decimated. The rhododendron bushes were trampled into the frozen mud, and the decorative stone retaining wall was kicked apart, the heavy gray rocks scattered across the frosted lawn like discarded toys. I walked slowly toward the yellow crime scene tape currently stretched across my driveway. My boots crunched over shattered pieces of ceramic and splintered wood. The cold night air was thick with the smell of exposed fiberglass insulation and ruptured drywall dust. Richard stood on the frozen grass near the porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket provided by a paramedic. He was not bleeding, but his face was devoid of color. He was trembling, playing the role of the terrified suburban victim with sickening perfection. A lead detective stood opposite him, holding a small notepad and a clicking pen. I moved closer, staying perfectly silent in the shadows of a large oak tree near the property line. The winter wind carried their voices directly to my ears. "I do not know who those men were," Richard stammered, his voice wavering dramatically. "They just showed up and started smashing everything. We were terrified, but I know exactly who sent them." The detective stopped writing and looked up. "Who do you suspect?" he asked, his tone strictly professional. "My daughter," Richard declared, pointing a trembling finger toward the empty street. "Naava Wilson. We had a terrible dispute yesterday. She transferred the deed of this house to her younger sister, but then she suffered a massive psychological breakdown. She demanded rent money tonight. When we refused, she threatened us. She hired these goons to vandalize the property because she is furious about the eviction." The sheer audacity of his lie paralyzed me. My father was drowning in $250,000 of illegal gambling debt. The men who destroyed my home were sent by the local betting syndicate to collect their bloody ledger. Yet Richard was using this terrifying intersection with the criminal underworld to permanently eliminate me. He was framing me for the violence to protect his own skin, aiming the entire police investigation directly at my back. A second officer emerged from the ruined doorway of my home, holding a clear plastic evidence bag. He approached the lead detective, interrupting my father and his twisted performance. "We found this resting on the hardwood floor in the living room," the officer reported, holding the bag up to the flashing cruiser lights. "It was thrown through the main picture window." I strained my eyes to see through the gloom. Inside the plastic bag was a heavy red landscaping brick. Wrapped tightly around the rough clay was a piece of white paper, secured with a thick black rubber band. It was a betting slip. Even from a distance, I could recognize the distinct blue ink of a local bookmaker tally sheet. The syndicate had left a literal calling card, a brutal reminder demanding the rest of the money Richard owed them. Richard stared at the evidence bag, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly what that slip of paper meant, but he did not break character. "She is insane," Richard whispered, forcing a dramatic tear to spill down his cheek. "She is trying to make it look like we are involved with criminals. She is trying to frame me." I had seen enough. Stepping into the light and demanding to speak to the detective would only feed into his narrative of the hysterical, stalking daughter. I slowly backed away from the oak tree, keeping my footsteps light until I reached the safety of my parked sedan. I slipped inside, started the engine, and drove away from the wreckage of my own life. I returned to the sterile confines of the hotel room, my mind racing with legal strategies and survival tactics. Logan needed to see the police report immediately. The betting slip was the tangible connection to Highland Consulting. It proved the debt was real, which proved the home equity line of credit was a desperate fraud. The sun eventually crept over the horizon, casting a pale gray morning light through the thin hotel curtains. I sat in the desk chair, fully dressed, drinking a cup of terrible instant coffee. I was preparing to call my attorney when a sharp, authoritative knock struck my door. It was not the frantic pounding Haley had delivered the night before. This knock was measured, heavy, and official. I stood up, walking cautiously to the door and peering through the small glass peephole. A man in a plain brown suit stood in the hallway, holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like a syndicate enforcer, nor did he look like a police officer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open a few inches. "Yes," I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Are you Nava Wilson?" the man inquired, his tone flat and heavily practiced. "I am," I replied. The man shoved the thick manila envelope through the small opening, forcing me to take it. "You have been served," he stated simply, turning on his heel and walking down the corridor without another word. I closed the door, my fingers gripping the heavy paper package. I walked over to the bed and tore the flap open. A massive stack of legal documents slid out onto the quilt. The header on the first page featured the official seal of the local district court. I read the bold black text, the air escaping my lungs in a sharp rush. It was an emergency restraining order. Richard and Brenda had not just filed a police report. They went directly to a judge at the break of dawn. They used the syndicate vandalism as fabricated absolute proof that I was a violent, unstable danger to their physical safety. The judge had signed the order granting them full protective status. The document strictly prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of my own house, my parents, or my sister. But the final paragraph was the true fatal blow. Because the court now officially viewed me as a violent threat, the order mandated the immediate freezing of all my remaining personal bank accounts to prevent me from funding any further criminal retaliation. My family had successfully weaponized the justice system, locking me out of my own finances and completely severing my ability to fight back. My name is Nava Wilson. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the local district courtroom cast a sickly pallor over the heavy oak tables and the scuffed linoleum floor. Before I describe the sheer absurdity of watching my own mother fake a medical emergency under oath, I want you to consider a scenario. Have you ever possessed the absolute truth while everyone around you blindly believed a beautifully constructed lie? Tell me how you survived that isolation in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel as we finally dismantle this criminal family piece by piece. I sat perfectly still beside my attorney Logan at the dark wooden defense table. The air inside the judicial chamber smelled of cheap floor wax and stale anxiety. My financial accounts remained completely frozen. My corporate career was suspended indefinitely. If the judge granted this permanent restraining order today, Richard and Brenda would legally cement their theft. They would bar me from stepping within 500 feet of my own property while they slowly drained the fraudulent home equity line of credit dry. My parents sat just 15 feet away at the petitioner table. They had dressed for the performance of a lifetime. Richard wore an oversized gray suit that made his shoulders slump deliberately, projecting the image of a weary, beaten patriarch who could barely carry the weight of his own family tragedy. Brenda had completely abandoned her usual heavy makeup and expensive jewelry. She wore a faded beige cardigan over a plain cotton blouse. She kept her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly together on the tabletop, trembling with practiced vulnerability. They looked like the absolute perfect victims of elder abuse. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with silver hair and a reputation for zero tolerance, reviewed the emergency docket. She adjusted her reading glasses, looking down at the immense stack of paperwork my parents had filed at dawn. She instructed their state-appointed counsel to present the legal justification for the protective order. The opposing attorney, a young man who clearly believed every single word of their elaborate fabrication, stood up and painted a terrifying picture. He described the aggressive home invasion the night before with intense theatricality. He claimed I was a disgruntled, financially unstable addict who had transferred my property to my sister in a rare moment of clarity, only to experience severe seller remorse. He explicitly accused me of hiring criminal enforcers to smash the front windows and terrorize my elderly parents when they refused to pay me extortion money. As the young lawyer described the shattering glass and the ruined landscaping, Brenda initiated the next phase of her performance. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Her right hand shot up to her chest, her fingers clutching the cheap fabric of her beige cardigan. She began to hyperventilate, her shoulders heaving dramatically as she leaned heavily against the wooden table. Richard immediately wrapped an arm around her, whispering frantic consolations, while casting a look of pure, fabricated terror in my direction. Judge Harrison immediately paused the proceedings, asking if the petitioner required emergency medical attention. Brenda shook her head weakly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue, claiming she was just profoundly terrified of what her daughter might do next. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. 2 days ago, this exact woman orchestrated the theft of $40,000 from my savings. Today, she was acting like a frightened bird trapped in a cage. I looked at Logan. He did not look worried. He looked incredibly bored. When the judge finally turned her attention to the defense, asking for our formal rebuttal to these severe allegations, Logan slowly stood up. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket, projecting an aura of absolute unshakable confidence. Logan did not waste a single second denying the vandalism. He completely bypassed the shattered windows and the destroyed property. Instead, he addressed the judge directly, his voice echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, my client did not orchestrate the destruction at the property last night. That destruction was the direct result of a $250,000 illegal gambling debt owed by the petitioner, Richard Wilson, to a local sports betting syndicate." The courtroom grew deathly quiet. The ambient hum of the ventilation system felt overwhelmingly loud. Richard stiffened, his protective arm dropping from Brenda's shoulders. The young opposing counsel looked completely bewildered, frantically flipping through his case file as if he had missed a crucial page. Logan continued his relentless assault. Furthermore, the petitioners are not the victims of intimidation. They are the active aggressors in a coordinated federal identity fraud scheme. Yesterday afternoon, the petitioners sent a proxy to physically threaten my client into dropping her civil suit regarding the forged quitclaim deed. We request permission to submit an audio recording into evidence, captured just hours before the alleged vandalism took place. Judge Harrison narrowed her eyes, evaluating the bold claim. She granted the request with a sharp nod. Logan connected his laptop to the courtroom audio system. He tapped a key on his keyboard. The ambient noise of the greasy diner parking lot filled the cavernous room. Then Travis' menacing, gravelly voice echoed through the high-fidelity speakers. "I did what I had to do to get paid. Your father offered me $5,000 to make the notary problem disappear. You need to accept your loss and walk away right now." The recording continued perfectly, capturing the terrifying moment Travis slammed me against my vehicle and explicitly threatened further harm if I did not abandon the property dispute. The audio quality was pristine, picking up the crunch of his boots and the aggressive strike of his lighter. The digital file concluded, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. The color completely drained from Richard's face, leaving him looking like a pale ghost. Brenda stopped her theatrical hyperventilation instantly, her jaw dropping slightly as the crushing reality of their exposure set in. They had walked into a court of law, expecting to seal my fate with fake tears. Instead, Logan had just played an explicit confession of their criminal conspiracy onto the official judicial record. Judge Harrison face turned a deep shade of crimson with absolute fury. She glared down at the petitioner table, her eyes burning right through their pathetic disguises. She slammed her wooden gavel down with enough force to make the opposing counsel visibly flinch. Emergency restraining order denied. She barked, her voice dripping with judicial venom. This court will not be weaponized to facilitate federal fraud. The temporary freeze on the respondent financial accounts is lifted immediately. And Mr. Wilson, I suggest you retain criminal defense counsel today because I am forwarding this exact audio transcript directly to the district attorney office for review. Court was dismissed. We did not wait to watch my parents scramble out of the room in disgrace. I walked out of the heavy double doors, the stale air of the courtroom giving way to the cool, echoing expanse of the marble hallway. My accounts were unfrozen. The legal blockade was entirely destroyed. The momentum had finally shifted back into my hands. Logan walked beside me, slipping his laptop back into his sleek leather briefcase. That buys us the necessary time to file the civil injunction against the bank, he noted, his pace brisk and purposeful. We have them completely on the defensive now. We can systematically freeze the home equity line before they withdraw another cent. I stopped walking, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I turned to look at my attorney. The deep exhaustion that had plagued me for 3 days was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. The legal victory was satisfying, but it was nowhere near enough. My family had tried to destroy my career, steal my home, and frame me for syndicate violence. I am done playing defense, Logan, I stated, my voice carrying a lethal calmness that echoed slightly in the empty corridor. My family just tried to use a sitting judge to steal my life and lock me in a cage. I am not waiting for the civil courts to sort out the home equity line. I am destroying their entire operation right now. Logan paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he studied my expression. What exactly are you planning to do, Nava? He asked, his lawyerly caution finally returning. I reached into the inner compartment of my purse and pulled out a small encrypted external hard drive. The metal casing felt heavy and cold against my palm. I brought the digital ledgers from my corporate firm, I replied, staring directly into his eyes. While investigating the Highland Consulting wire transfers this morning, I found a staggering vulnerability in my mother's hidden banking structure. I have the silver bullet, Logan, and by tomorrow morning my entire family is going to federal prison. My name is Nava Wilson. The encrypted external hard drive felt heavy and remarkably cold in the palm of my hand as I stood in the echoing marble corridor of the district courthouse. Before I tell you how a single piece of hidden technology dismantled an entire criminal conspiracy, I want to ask you something. Have you ever let your enemies believe they had completely destroyed you, just so you could watch them dance in their own arrogance? Tell me your strategy in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel as we transition from playing defense to launching a federal offensive. Logan stared at the small silver rectangle resting on my open palm, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He was a brilliant real estate attorney, but his expertise resided in property law and civil statutes, not digital surveillance. We walked out of the courthouse together, the crisp Montana afternoon air hitting our faces. The aggressive winter wind whipped my heavy coat around my legs, but I felt entirely impervious to the cold. The frozen panic that had consumed me for the past 72 hours was gone. We returned to his boutique law firm in absolute silence. The leather seats of his luxury sedan offered a quiet sanctuary as we navigated through the Bozeman traffic. When we reached his corner office, Logan immediately locked the heavy oak door. He bypassed his usual cup of artisanal coffee and sat directly behind his polished mahogany desk. I dragged a leather guest chair around to his side of the desk, sitting shoulder to shoulder with him. I plugged the metal drive into the lateral port of his computer monitor. A black folder icon appeared on the glowing screen. I clicked the icon, revealing a vast directory of compressed digital files. What exactly am I looking at? Nava Logan asked. his voice low and analytical. "You are looking at absolute arrogance," I replied, my fingers flying across his keyboard to decrypt the primary folder. "When my father brought his entire operation into my house, he made a catastrophic assumption. He assumed that because I am a financial analyst, I only understand ledgers and stock portfolios. He forgot that I travel extensively for corporate audits. Leaving a $600,000 property empty for weeks at a time requires substantial security." I opened a subfolder labeled Interior Optics. When Richard and Brenda ambushed me on the front lawn, they smugly bragged about unplugging my smart home router. I explained, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. They thought severing the physical internet connection rendered the house blind. They had no idea the primary hub contained an integrated cellular backup module. The moment the local area network dropped, the system seamlessly switched to a dedicated encrypted frequency, broadcasting directly to a secure cloud server. They did not disable my security. They just locked themselves inside a high-definition recording studio. Logan leaned forward, his breath hitching slightly as the media player launched. The screen flickered to life, displaying a pristine, wide-angle view of my custom kitchen. The timestamp burned into the bottom corner indicated it was Tuesday evening, exactly 2 days before they changed my locks. The resolution was breathtaking. The digital optical sensors I had installed discreetly inside the crown molding captured every single detail. I pressed the spacebar to initiate the playback. The integrated microphones picked up the sound of a heavy glass bottle uncorking. Richard, Brenda, Haley, and Travis were gathered around my white marble kitchen island. They looked incredibly comfortable, treating my sanctuary like their personal tavern. Richard stood at the head of the island, holding a bottle of 2018 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a vintage I had specifically purchased to celebrate my 30th birthday next year. Richard poured the dark red liquid into 4 of my expensive crystal goblets. He handed one to the corrupt notary. Travis took a greedy sip, leaning back against the expensive cabinetry with a smug expression. "This is a beautiful property," Richard Travis drawled, his voice captured with terrifying clarity by the acoustic sensors. "Are you sure she is not going to fight the transfer?" Richard let out a booming, cruel laugh. The sound echoed through the computer speakers, sending a phantom chill down my spine. My own father was celebrating my destruction. "Let her try," Richard boasted, swirling the expensive wine in his glass. "By the time that ungrateful brat realizes she has been locked out, the equity line will be fully drained and transferred. She cares entirely too much about her precious corporate reputation to drag this into a public courtroom. We are taking exactly what she owes us for raising her. Just stamp the document, Travis." Brenda chimed in, leaning across the marble surface. "Make sure the date reflects Monday," she instructed, her tone completely stripped of the pathetic vulnerability she had just weaponized in the courtroom an hour ago. "We need the loan origination to predate the title transfer, so the bank processes the cash without demanding a secondary signature." The digital video captured the exact moment Travis pulled his official state commission stamp from his leather jacket. He pressed the heavy metal seal onto the stack of federal banking documents, leaving a dark, permanent mark of identity fraud. Haley immediately slid the papers into a thick manila folder, her face glowing with pure, unadulterated greed. I pressed the spacebar again, freezing the frame on my father's smiling face. The silence in the law office was absolute. Logan stared at the frozen image on his monitor. He slowly reached up and loosened his expensive silk tie. For the first time since I hired him, the seasoned attorney looked genuinely stunned. "I watched my family plot my ruin from a hotel room," I stated, softly staring at the screen. "I watched them drink my wine, forge my signature, and sell my future to a local sports betting syndicate. They handed me the weapon of their own destruction." Logan exhaled a long, sharp breath. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of professional awe and deep concern. "Nava," he whispered, "this is not just a civil property dispute anymore. This footage elevates their actions from local real estate fraud to a massive federal conspiracy. We are looking at premeditated wire fraud, bank fraud, and a coordinated violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." I am fully aware of the statutes, Logan, I replied, meeting his gaze without a single ounce of hesitation. The civil game was a necessary distraction. We needed to survive the restraining order to maintain my freedom of movement, but I am not interested in merely reclaiming the deed to that house anymore. That house is tainted. I want them removed from society entirely. We are shifting to an offensive federal criminal strategy, Logan confirmed, his professional demeanor snapping back into place with lethal precision. He grabbed a fresh legal pad and began writing furiously. If we submit this unedited footage directly to the local police, it could get buried in bureaucratic red tape. The district attorney might offer them a plea deal to avoid a costly trial. We cannot allow that. Exactly, I agreed, which is why we are bypassing the state-level justice system entirely. Logan nodded, his pen scratching aggressively across the paper. The institution holding the fraudulent home equity line of credit is a federally insured national syndicate. We bypass the local detectives and go straight to the apex predators. Logan began opening secure communication channels on his secondary monitor. He initiated a high-priority digital transfer protocol. He packaged the entire directory of surveillance footage along with the audio confession from Travis at the diner and the betting slip left by the syndicate enforcers. He attached my pristine flight records proving I was in Denver during the notarization process. He compiled a devastating, incontrovertible dossier of absolute guilt. He clicked the first destination target, the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically addressing the division commander overseeing interstate financial crimes. Next, he addressed a secondary encrypted parcel. This one was directed to the executive director of national risk management at the banking institution that originated the fraudulent loan. Banks despise losing money, but they despise public embarrassment even more. Providing them with undeniable proof that their underwriting department approved a $250,000 loan based on a forged notary stamp would trigger an immediate, ruthless corporate retaliation. The progress bar on the screen illuminated in a bright blue line slowly creeping toward 100%. Each percentage point represented a nail in the coffin of my family empire of lies. Are you absolutely certain about this? Nava Logan asked, his hand hovering over the final execution command. Once I hit send, there is no unwinding this process. The federal government will seize the property as evidence. They will freeze every single bank account tied to your parents and your sister. They will issue federal arrest warrants. Your family will not just lose the money, they will lose their freedom for a very long time. I thought about the shattered ceramic plate on my front porch. I thought about the $40,000 drained from my emergency fund. I thought about the smug smile on Haley's face as she wore my favorite sweater and the terrifying threat Travis delivered in the freezing parking lot. I thought about my father standing in the wreckage of my living room, pointing a trembling finger at the street, actively trying to frame me for syndicate violence. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life, I answered, my voice steady and resolute. Logan pressed the enter key. The digital packages vanished from the outbox. The transmission was complete. The trap was officially set, armed with the most devastating evidence imaginable, waiting patiently for my family to make their final, fatal mistake. My name is Nava Wilson. The machinery of federal justice operates with agonizing slowness right up until the exact second it strikes with terrifying and unavoidable violence. Before I describe the exquisite satisfaction of watching a tactical team dismantle a lavish celebration, I want to ask my listeners a question. Have you ever discovered that the person you thought was merely a foolish follower was actually the vicious architect of your destruction? Share your betrayals in the comments and remember to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel as we witness the ultimate consequences of unrestrained greed. Logan and I spent Thursday morning meticulously reviewing the remaining digital files captured by my covert surveillance hub. We were waiting for the federal task force to finalize their tactical strategy, giving us a temporary window of agonizing anticipation. During a secondary acoustic sweep of the kitchen footage, we uncovered a conversation that fundamentally shifted my understanding of this entire nightmare. It occurred roughly 10 minutes after the corrupt notary left the premises with the forged documents. Haley and Richard were pouring a second bottle of my expensive vintage wine. Richard expressed a fleeting moment of cowardly hesitation, wiping sweat from his forehead. He worried aloud that stealing my identity might attract municipal law enforcement, suggesting they should perhaps delay the wire transfer to the sports betting syndicate. Haley did not comfort him. Instead, she commanded the room with a chilling, predatory authority. "You need to stop panicking right now," she snapped, her voice utterly devoid of its usual whining cadence. "I set this entire structure up perfectly. Nava has an immaculate credit score. When the bank approves the equity line, we pay off the syndicate immediately. If she reports the fraud later, the transaction originates from her own residence using her own internet protocol address. The investigators will assume she took the money, transferred it to offshore accounts, and faked a burglary to cover her tracks. I made sure every single digital footprint points directly back to her. Do exactly what I told you to do, or those bookmakers are going to break your legs." I sat frozen in the law office, staring at the frozen image of my sister on the computer monitor. Haley was 26 years old. Throughout our childhood, she was a master of deflective accountability. If a valuable item broke inside our residence, she would immediately orchestrate an elaborate scenario where I was the only logical culprit. Brenda constantly praised her beauty while ignoring her massive academic failures, cultivating a deep-seated toxic entitlement. I always assumed her ignorance was authentic, viewing her as a spoiled parasite riding our parents' coattails. I was profoundly wrong. She was not a passive participant. She was a calculating, cold-blooded mastermind. She had exploited our father and his terrifying gambling addiction, weaponizing his desperation to fund a luxurious lifestyle she could never afford on her own. She manipulated the entire identity theft scheme from the shadows, knowing with absolute certainty that I would take the devastating fall. Fast forward to Friday evening. The family believed they had achieved total, unassailable victory. The fraudulent bank funds had successfully cleared the initial holding period, and the syndicate debt was momentarily satisfied. To celebrate their massive criminal payday, they decided to throw an extravagant housewarming party at my physical address. It was a grotesque display of unearned triumph. Caterers carried silver trays of expensive appetizers through my splintered entryway. The shattered bay windows were temporarily covered by thick industrial plastic sheeting, but the pulsing bass of electronic dance music vibrated aggressively into the freezing suburban street. I sat quietly in the passenger seat of Logan imported sedan, parked discreetly 2 blocks away in the darkened cul-de-sac. The internal heater hummed gently, combating the frigid Montana winter wind outside. The contrast between my serene, quiet environment and the chaotic doom rapidly approaching my childhood abusers was intensely poetic. They were drinking expensive champagne and laughing underneath my custom chandeliers, completely oblivious to the massive storm gathering just beyond the horizon. At exactly 8:15, the flashing lights arrived. It was not a single patrol car responding to a neighborhood noise complaint. It was a highly coordinated, overwhelming federal tactical raid. 4 armored sport utility vehicles descended upon the property, their heavy tires grinding against the frosted asphalt. The electronic music abruptly cut off. A booming, authoritative voice echoed through a heavy-duty megaphone ordering every single person inside the residence to drop to the floor immediately. Dozens of heavily armed agents swarmed the manicured lawn. They wore dark tactical vests bearing the stark yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, moving alongside local municipal task force officers in a synchronized display of lethal precision. They did not knock politely. They utilized a heavy steel battering ram to completely obliterate whatever remained of my custom front door. The sheer volume of the breach echoed down the street like a localized earthquake. I rolled my window down just a fraction of an inch to listen to the beautiful, chaotic symphony of true accountability. Muffled screams of genuine panic spilled out onto the front porch. The hired caterers and oblivious party guests were swiftly escorted out of the building first, their hands raised high above their heads as officers secured the perimeter. Then the primary targets emerged from the wreckage of their own arrogance. 2 burly federal agents dragged Richard out into the frigid night air. He looked unimaginably pathetic, his face utterly drained of color, as the heavy metal handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Brenda followed closely behind, sobbing hysterically and struggling against the grip of a stern detective. Their smug confidence was entirely shattered, replaced by the crushing reality of federal indictments. But the true magnificent spectacle was Haley. She had purchased an incredibly expensive pale silk designer dress specifically for this occasion, funded entirely by stolen money. She was thrashing violently against the grip of a female tactical officer, screaming indignantly about her constitutional rights and demanding to speak to a manager as if she were at a retail clothing store. The federal officer showed zero hesitation or patience for her performance. Employing a swift mechanical maneuver, the agent forced my sister downward onto the muddy, freezing grass. The pristine, expensive silk fabric absorbed the dark filth of the ruined lawn instantly, ruining the luxurious garment. Her wrists were wrenched aggressively behind her back. The harsh metallic snap of the restraints echoed loudly across the yard, locking the arrogant mastermind into a permanent state of subjugation. The surrounding neighborhood had emptied into the street. Dozens of spectators wrapped in winter coats watched in stunned silence as the golden child of the Wilson family wept genuine tears of supreme humiliation. Her meticulously constructed facade was completely annihilated in front of the exact audience she wanted to impress. They realized far too late that I had not merely defended my territory, I had orchestrated a flawless, inescapable legal checkmate. They tried to play a game of local checkers, and I responded with a federal nuclear strike. The agents loaded my crying relatives into separate armored transport vehicles, ensuring they could not coordinate their fabricated stories. The flashing blue and red lights eventually faded into the distance, leaving my property secured behind bright yellow crime scene tape. Logan started the engine of his sedan silently, driving me back to my temporary hotel room. The evening had delivered an astonishing level of emotional satisfaction. I poured a glass of cheap tap water, relishing the profound silence of my temporary sanctuary. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked past midnight, signaling the beginning of a new, liberated chapter of my life. Then the harsh ringing of my cellular device shattered the quiet atmosphere. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was an automated notification from the county detention center. Sitting inside a sterile concrete holding cell facing decades of mandatory minimum sentencing for wire fraud and identity theft, Brenda was choosing to use her single legally mandated phone call. The automated voice of the penal communication system spoke with robotic indifference, asking if I would accept a collect call from an inmate. She was attempting to contact the exact daughter she had mercilessly tried to destroy. My name is Nava Wilson. The glowing screen of my cellular device illuminated the dark hotel room, displaying an incoming notification from the county detention center. Before I describe the sheer arrogance of my incarcerated relatives begging for financial rescue, I want you to consider a specific scenario. Have you ever listened to someone demand a life raft immediately after they intentionally drilled holes into your sinking ship? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to follow the Morning Revenge channel for more stories about breaking generational curses. I pressed the green icon on my touchscreen, accepting the exorbitant charges for the collect transmission. A brief burst of digital static hissed through the speaker, followed immediately by the chaotic ambient noise of the correctional institution. I could hear heavy metal doors slamming shut, the distant shouts of corrections officers, and the low, murmuring despair of dozens of confined individuals. It was the gritty, unforgiving soundtrack of absolute accountability. "Nava!" my mother barked into the receiver. Brenda did not offer a tentative greeting. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for orchestrating a $250,000 identity theft scheme that nearly destroyed my professional career. Instead, her tone was sharp, indignant, and deeply inconvenienced. She sounded exactly like a woman complaining to a restaurant manager about an undercooked steak, completely oblivious to the fact that she was wearing a bright orange canvas jumpsuit provided by the federal government. "You need to contact your financial broker first thing tomorrow morning," Brenda commanded, the metallic acoustics of the prison telephone amplifying her toxic entitlement. "Your father and I just finished our initial arraignment. The federal magistrate is completely unreasonable. Because the charges involve interstate wire fraud and substantial missing syndicate capital, the judge considers us an extreme flight risk. They set the bond at $500,000 each. We need 10% of that total amount in cash by tomorrow afternoon, or they are transferring us to the maximum security penitentiary awaiting trial." I sat perfectly still on the edge of the stiff mattress, genuinely stunned by the magnitude of her delusion. My mother was sitting inside a concrete cage, facing decades of mandatory minimum sentencing because she forged my signature on a federal banking document. Yet she possessed the breathtaking audacity to order me to liquidate my remaining assets to purchase her temporary freedom. I remained entirely silent, letting her demands hang in the dead air. My silence prompted Richard to snatch the receiver from her hands. I could hear a brief, muffled scuffle before my father's gruff, exhausted voice crackled through the connection. "Stop acting like a stubborn child," Nava Richard growled, attempting to project his usual patriarchal authority despite his catastrophic circumstances. "You know perfectly well that you have roughly $120,000 vested in your corporate stock portfolio. We need you to initiate an emergency liquidation. You can wire the liquidity directly to the municipal bail bondsman. We will figure out a repayment schedule after we get out of this ridiculous misunderstanding and hire a proper defense attorney." "A ridiculous misunderstanding," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "You stole my physical property. You opened a massive credit line using my social security number to pay off an illegal sports betting syndicate. You tried to frame me for a violent home invasion. You attempted to use a district court judge to freeze my bank accounts and ruin my life. This is not a misunderstanding, Richard. This is the direct consequence of your own criminal actions." "You forced our hand," Brenda shrieked in the background, her voice echoing shrilly across the detention center holding area. "If you had just signed the quitclaim deed like a grateful daughter, none of this tactical raid nonsense would have happened. We provided you with shelter and food for 18 years. We raised you. You owe us this money. You owe us your absolute loyalty." The sheer psychological projection was staggering. They had weaponized my genetic lineage for decades, using the concept of biological relation as a blunt instrument to extract resources, compliance, and endless forgiveness. They honestly believed that bringing a child into the world granted them an irrevocable license to destroy that child's future whenever it suited their selfish needs. This was the ultimate test of my emotional fortitude. The ingrained societal pressure to rescue my blood relations screamed at me to surrender my portfolio, to sacrifice my hard-earned stability just to appease their relentless demands. But the terrified, compliant version of Nava Wilson died the moment Haley demanded rent money for my own house. I felt absolutely nothing for the people on the other end of this telephone connection. The toxic obligations that bound me to their chaotic existence were permanently severed. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "I did not ask to be born into your dysfunctional circus. I am not responsible for your gambling addictions, your fraudulent schemes, or your staggering incompetence. You made a calculated decision to steal from me. Now you get to experience the unadulterated reality of federal prosecution. I am not cashing out a single share of my corporate stock. I am not calling a bondsman. You are going to sit in that cell and rot." Brenda snatched the receiver back, launching into a manic, high-pitched guilt trip. "You selfish, ungrateful monster!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperate rage. "We are your parents. You cannot abandon us in this horrible place. The food is inedible. The guards treat us like animals. You have to save us, Nava. You have to." She did not get to finish her manipulative tirade. "You have 30 seconds remaining on this prepaid call," the robotic automated voice of the jail communication system announced, slicing brutally through my mother's frantic sobbing. The mechanical interruption was a masterpiece of poetic justice, a cold, uncaring reminder that Brenda no longer controlled the narrative. Her tears held absolutely zero currency in the eyes of the state justice system. "Please, Nava," Richard begged, his arrogant facade finally crumbling as the countdown timer ticked away their last ounce of hope. "Do not do this to us." "Enjoy your new federally funded housing," I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "Do not ever attempt to contact me again." I pressed the red disconnect icon on my screen. The digital connection severed instantly, plunging my hotel room back into a beautiful, profound silence. I tossed the cellular device onto the neighboring pillow and laid back against the headboard. A massive weight evaporated from my chest. I had faced the ultimate emotional blackmail and completely shattered it. I had refused to participate in this cycle of abuse. I closed my eyes, prepared to finally sleep after 4 days of relentless warfare, but my peaceful victory was painfully short-lived. Less than 5 minutes after I disconnected the prison call, my phone began vibrating violently against the mattress. I groaned, picking up the device. The caller identification displayed my attorney name. I answered immediately, knowing Logan would not call this late unless the situation had critically evolved. "We have a massive problem," Logan announced, skipping any polite introductions. His voice was tense, laced with a sharp professional urgency that instantly spiked my adrenaline. "What happened?" I asked, sitting upright and swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. "I just spoke to my parents. They are securely locked in the county facility, awaiting their bail hearing. The tactical raid was a complete success." "The raid secured your immediate family," Logan corrected, his fingers typing rapidly on a keyboard in the background. "But they missed a secondary target. Travis was not at the housewarming party when the Bureau breached the doors. The corrupt notary somehow avoided the dragnet." My stomach plummeted. Travis was the dangerous wild card, a man completely comfortable with physical violence and extortion. If he was still roaming free, my physical safety was severely compromised. "It gets substantially worse," Logan continued, his tone turning incredibly grim. "I just received an emergency alert from the National Risk Management Director at the bank. Because it is late Friday evening, the federal freeze on the fraudulent home equity line of credit has not fully propagated through the banking mainframe. Travis is currently standing inside a local, 24-hour supermarket branch on the north side of town." "What is he doing there?" I demanded, grabbing my heavy winter coat from the chair. "He possesses a forged authorization slip signed by your father, Logan," revealed the gravity of the situation, settling heavily into the conversation. "Travis realizes the entire operation is collapsing. He is actively attempting to drain the remaining $50,000 of the credit funds in untraceable cashier checks before skipping town permanently. If he successfully withdraws that capital, the bank might hold you partially liable for the unsecured loss. We have to stop him right now. My name is Nava Wilson." The freezing night air whipped against the windshield of the luxury sedan as we sped down the empty commercial boulevard. Before I describe the ultimate satisfaction of trapping a cornered rat inside a brightly lit grocery store, I want to pose a question to my listeners. Have you ever watched a professional manipulator realize their entire foundation of lies has collapsed right beneath their feet? Share your most triumphant moments in the comments, and be sure to follow the Morning Revenge channel as we execute the final phase of this absolute destruction. Logan gripped the leather steering wheel with immense intensity, his knuckles turning entirely white under the dashboard illumination. We were racing against a digital clock. The corrupt notary was actively attempting to siphon the final $50,000 of the fraudulent equity line. If that capital successfully cleared an international wire protocol, the corporate banking institution would experience a massive unsecured loss. That bureaucratic nightmare could potentially tie my property title up in litigation for several agonizing years. We needed to intercept the transaction before the data packets reached the offshore clearinghouse. Travis was not always a hardened criminal enabler. A decade ago, he was a relatively successful regional property broker dealing in mid-level commercial acquisitions. His downfall was not orchestrated by a tragic twist of fate. It was fueled by pure, unadulterated greed. He began authenticating minor signature discrepancies to expedite closing dates for his wealthiest clients. That small ethical compromise eventually mutated into stamping completely forged deeds for local syndicates and desperate gamblers. He viewed my family as just another lucrative paycheck, assuming I was too timid to challenge his imposing physical presence or his official state commission. He severely miscalculated my threshold for retaliation. Logan connected his cellular device to the vehicle Bluetooth integration, dialing the private emergency contact for the National Risk Management Director. The executive answered on the first ring, his voice sounding incredibly sharp despite the late hour. Logan quickly explained the evolving crisis, detailing the physical location of the rogue notary. The director did not hesitate. He immediately logged into the central administrative mainframe from his home office, preparing to manually override the automated processing systems at the local municipal branch. We swerved into the massive asphalt parking lot of the 24-hour supermarket. The glowing neon signage cast long, ominous shadows across the scattered patches of black ice. I unbuckled my seatbelt before the sedan even reached a complete stop. Logan killed the engine, and we moved swiftly across the frozen pavement toward the sliding glass entry doors. The interior of the massive retail facility offered a surreal contrast to the high-stakes federal felony unfolding inside. The environment smelled distinctly of industrial floor wax and overripe citrus fruits. Generic pop music played softly over the ceiling speakers, providing a mundane soundtrack for the late-night shoppers pushing squeaky metal carts down the brightly illuminated aisles. We bypassed the fresh produce section, keeping our footsteps light and purposeful as we navigated toward the customer service kiosk situated near the pharmacy department. I spotted him immediately. Travis stood at the primary teller window wearing the exact same cheap leather jacket he wore when he threatened me in the diner parking lot. He was leaning heavily against the laminate counter, aggressively tapping his thick fingers against the surface. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the heavy sheen of panicked sweat coating his forehead. He knew the tactical raid had occurred. He knew his wealthy co-conspirators were currently occupying a federal holding cell. He was desperately trying to extract his final payout before fleeing the jurisdiction entirely. Logan and I positioned ourselves behind a large cardboard display of seasonal merchandise, remaining completely hidden from his direct line of sight. We observed the interaction with surgical detachment. The employee working behind the financial counter was a remarkably young woman wearing a green corporate vest. She looked utterly exhausted, chewing a piece of generic gum while staring blankly at her computer terminal. She possessed absolutely no idea that the aggressive man standing before her was attempting to finalize a massive interstate wire fraud. "Process the transaction immediately," Travis demanded, his gravelly voice echoing harshly across the quiet retail space. "I handed you the authorized slip signed by the account holder. The routing numbers are correct. Just push the capital through the system right now." The young teller sighed, her fingers clicking methodically across her mechanical keyboard. "I am trying to process the request, sir," she replied, her tone dripping with bored customer service apathy. "The network is experiencing a strange latency issue. The central underwriting server is requiring a manual review of the offshore destination account." Travis clenched his jaw, shooting a paranoid glance over his shoulder. The walls were rapidly closing in around him. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, the adrenaline clearly short-circuiting his ability to think rationally. At that exact moment, the corporate risk director executed his final administrative command from his remote location. The digital trap snapped completely shut. The standard blue interface on the teller computer monitor instantly vanished. It was replaced by a massive pulsing alert screen. The glowing red words, "Transaction declined," illuminated the workspace with blinding intensity. The crimson light reflected directly onto the pale, terrified face of the corrupt notary. The digital rejection was absolute, permanently locking the remaining stolen funds safely inside the secured ledger. "What did you just do?" Travis hissed, slamming his heavy fist against the laminate counter. "Give me my paperwork back, right now!" "I did not do anything, sir," the teenage employee stammered, leaning away from his sudden burst of aggression. "The corporate security matrix just froze the entire profile, and the system just triggered a silent branch alarm." The color completely drained from his features. The realization of his absolute doom finally settled into his arrogant mind. He had been cornered. He turned away from the kiosk, his eyes scanning the sprawling retail layout for an emergency exit. As he pivoted toward the main sliding doors, his gaze locked directly onto my face. I stepped out from behind the cardboard display, standing perfectly still in the center of the linoleum aisle. I did not speak. I did not need to utter a single word. I simply offered him a cold, victorious smile. Panic completely overwhelmed his nervous system. Travis abandoned his forged documents on the counter and broke into a frantic sprint, his heavy boots slipping wildly against the polished floorboards. He tried to run toward the rear loading docks, desperate to escape the consequences of his actions. He managed to travel exactly 15 yards before the consequences caught him. The local authorities had arrived silently through the secondary employee entrances. 2 plainclothes detectives and 3 heavily armored patrol officers converged on the fleeing suspect with breathtaking speed. A massive uniformed officer lunged forward, driving his shoulder directly into the lower torso of the corrupt enabler. The physical impact was magnificent. Travis flew backward, crashing violently into an end cap display of aluminum soup cans. The cylindrical containers cascaded around him in a deafening metallic avalanche. He hit the floor hard, gasping for oxygen as the law enforcement team swarmed his massive frame. They aggressively wrenched his arms behind his back, forcing his wrists together with brutal efficiency. The sharp mechanical ratcheting sound of the steel handcuffs echoed through the supermarket, signaling the permanent end of his criminal enterprise. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead detective bellowed, hauling the defeated giant onto his feet. "I strongly suggest you utilize that right immediately." Logan crossed his arms, watching the officers drag the cursing, struggling notary out of the building. The threat was entirely neutralized. Every single participant in the conspiracy had been systematically dismantled and handed over to the justice system. Fast forward to the following morning. The atmosphere inside the local police precinct was vastly different from the chaotic energy of the supermarket takedown. The lobby smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaning supplies. I sat comfortably on a rigid wooden bench, feeling a profound sense of absolute tranquility washing over my exhausted body. The National Banking Institution had formally apologized for their catastrophic underwriting failure. Desperate to avoid a massive civil lawsuit regarding their negligence, they immediately reversed the fraudulent credit line and initiated the rapid restoration of my pristine property deed. The legal checkmate was completely finalized. The heavy oak door leading to the administrative offices swung open. The municipal police chief, a seasoned veteran with a stern expression and graying hair, walked directly toward my seating area. He was holding a small, clear plastic evidence bag. He stopped in front of me, offering a rare, genuine smile. "Your attorney is finishing the final witness statements inside," the chief stated, his voice carrying a tone of deep professional respect. "We coordinated with the federal prosecutors this morning. The indictments against your family members and the notary are absolutely rock solid. They will not be seeing the outside of a prison cafeteria for a very long time." "Thank you, Chief," I replied, standing up to meet his gaze. He unsealed the plastic pouch and extended his hand. Inside his palm rested the heavy brass keys to my custom front door, recovered from my father during the initial tactical raid. "I believe these rightfully belong to you, Miss Wilson," the chief said gently. "You fought a brilliant war. It is time for you to go home. My name is Nava Wilson." The heavy brass keys felt strangely weighty in my palm as I stood on the frozen concrete threshold of my own property. Before I describe the bittersweet reality of reclaiming a stolen sanctuary, I want to ask my listeners a final question. Have you ever fought a brutal war to win something back, only to realize your true victory required walking away from it entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel as we conclude this journey of absolute vindication. I stepped through the temporary plywood barricade the municipal task force had erected over my ruined entryway. The internal atmosphere of the residence was incredibly jarring. The ambient temperature was frigid, the winter draft seeping through the thick plastic sheeting that currently covered my shattered living room windows. The distinct smell of catered appetizers lingered in the stagnant air, mixed sickeningly with the harsh chemical odor of industrial carpet cleaner the police used to process the scene. I walked slowly across the foyer, my winter boots crunching softly against microscopic fragments of glass that the cleanup crew had missed. The silence inside the dwelling was absolute and profoundly heavy. The chaotic bass of the electronic dance music was gone. The arrogant laughter of my abusers was permanently extinguished. I was the sole remaining occupant of a battlefield where my relatives had met their complete demise. My cellular phone chimed quietly in my coat pocket, breaking the suffocating stillness. The incoming caller identification displayed the private number of a managing director at my financial firm. 2 days ago, the Human Resources Department had placed me on an indefinite suspension, treating me like a volatile liability based on the fabricated restraining order. Today, their collective tone was drastically different. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially forwarded Logan's pristine evidentiary dossier to the corporate legal team, completely exonerating me of any wrongdoing. The managing director sounded genuinely terrified, stumbling over his own words as he offered a groveling apology. He formally reinstated my employment effective immediately. Furthermore, desperately attempting to avoid a massive wrongful termination lawsuit, the executive board unanimously voted to promote me to the position of senior regional auditor, accompanied by a staggering compensation increase. I accepted the promotion with a calm, measured response, fully recognizing that the leverage now belonged entirely to me. The legal resolution for my parents and sister was completely devoid of any such grace. Federal prosecutors do not negotiate with arrogant amateurs. When presented with the undeniable surveillance footage and the explicit audio recordings, the assigned district attorney refused to offer a single plea agreement. Richard, Brenda, and Haley were formally indicted on multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. The presiding magistrate firmly denied their secondary requests for a bail reduction, citing their staggering lack of remorse and their active attempts to flee the jurisdiction. They are currently facing mandatory minimum sentences ranging between 5 and 10 years inside a maximum security penitentiary. The smug entitlement that defined their entire existence had been completely eradicated. They will spend the next decade wearing identical canvas uniforms, eating scheduled meals in a concrete cafeteria, and realizing that the daughter they viewed as a disposable asset was the architect of their permanent ruin. I removed my heavy outerwear and walked into the center of the kitchen. The morning sunlight filtered through the plastic window coverings, casting distorted, unnatural shadows across the hardwood flooring. I knelt down beside the marble island, tracing my fingertips over the polished surface. That was when I noticed the damage. Deep, aggressive scuff marks scored the exquisite cherrywood planks near the baseboards. The indentations were the unmistakable signature of Haley, wearing her luxurious designer stiletto heels, grinding her disrespect directly into the foundation of my home. The sight of those marks triggered a sudden, visceral reaction in my chest. I retrieved a small container of specialized wood filler, a soft cloth, and a can of matching chemical stain from the utility closet. I lowered myself onto my hands and knees, methodically scrubbing the damaged floorboards. I applied the thick paste, smoothing it over the gouges with surgical precision. I let the material dry before buffing the surface until the ugly black streaks were entirely erased. It was a literal and metaphorical purging of their toxic presence. I spent the next several hours moving through every single room, wiping down the countertops, sanitizing the doorknobs, and scrubbing the physical remnants of their catastrophic audacity from my personal environment. However, as I stood back to admire the newly pristine living space, a profound realization washed over my exhausted mind. The scuffs were gone, but the invisible stains remained completely indelible. I could not look at the kitchen island without visualizing Richard pouring my vintage wine and celebrating my destruction. I could not glance out the front window without seeing Brenda faking a medical emergency on the lawn. I could not stand in the driveway without remembering the terrifying moment Travis slammed me against my vehicle. Winning the legal war meant I retained the physical deed, but keeping this specific property meant forcing myself to live inside a sprawling monument dedicated entirely to my own trauma. True triumph is not simply surviving an attack. True triumph is ensuring the attackers no longer dictate the trajectory of your existence. Retaining the house was an anchor to a past I desperately needed to sever. I dialed Logan office number, bypassing any discussion of civil litigation or criminal proceedings. I instructed my brilliant attorney to contact the most aggressive real estate brokerage in the county. I told him to list the property on the open market immediately, pricing the asset for a rapid, unconditional cash transaction. The dwelling was entirely repaired, meticulously cleaned, and completely empty of any emotional value. It sold in less than 48 hours to a young corporate executive relocating from out of state. I packed only the items that brought me genuine joy. I left the heavy, burdensome memories locked inside those empty rooms. The drive across the state of Montana took exactly 6 hours. The imposing, jagged peaks of the western mountain ranges slowly faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the rolling, serene foothills of the eastern plains. The winter sky transformed into a brilliant canvas of bright blue and vibrant orange as the afternoon sun began its descent. I listened to a quiet instrumental playlist, letting the soothing melodies drown out the lingering echoes of courtroom gavels and police sirens. I drove until the lingering anxiety in my chest evaporated, replaced by a quiet, unshakable peace. The geographical distance acted as a massive, impenetrable shield against the chaos I had left behind. I eventually parked my sedan in the spacious driveway of a stunning, modern ranch-style property. The architecture was entirely different from the craftsman dwelling I had surrendered. There were no dark corners, no heavy wooden accents, and absolutely no ghosts waiting in the shadows. Large, unobstructed panes of reinforced glass offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the untouched wilderness. I walked up the wide stone pathway, my footsteps sounding light and unburdened in the crisp evening air. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, freshly cut silver key. I slid the metal into the deadbolt mechanism. The tumblers clicked into place with a sharp, satisfying sound. I turned the handle, pushed the heavy wooden barrier open, and stepped inside a beautiful, peaceful new reality, leaving the wreckage of my former life permanently locked outside. The flashing lights of federal cruisers fading into the freezing Montana night, the shattering of custom glass on a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, the cold mechanical click of handcuffs locking around the wrists of a mother, a father, and a sister. These are the explosive outward manifestations of a tragedy that did not begin with a forged quitclaim deed or a $250,000 sports betting debt. The harrowing story of Naava Wilson and her relentless fight for survival is, at its absolute core, a devastating autopsy of a family. It is a profound cautionary tale about what happens when the sacred, fundamental duty of parenting is corrupted by entitlement, deceit, and a complete absence of emotional accountability. In traditional American culture, we place the nuclear family on a towering, unassailable pedestal. We are conditioned from a very young age to believe that the home is a permanent sanctuary, a sacred proving ground where foundational values are forged and moral character is meticulously built. We idolize the image of the white picket fence and the manicured lawn, equating outward financial stability with internal virtue. But a heavy wooden roof and 4 beautifully painted walls do not automatically generate a safe haven. Richard and Brenda Wilson represent a terrifying, all-too-real archetype of catastrophic parental failure hidden in plain sight. They did not raise children. They cultivated a dynamic of ruthless exploitation, fundamentally confusing financial provision with moral guidance. Because they provided a roof and food for 18 years, they believed they held an eternal, unbreakable lien against their eldest daughter's soul. They treated Naava's hard-earned autonomy and financial stability as resources they could simply revoke the moment their own reckless choices caught up with them. Honest, long-term guidance requires a parent to possess deep emotional awareness. It demands the humility to look at your offspring and recognize them as entirely independent human beings, not as extensions of your own fragile ego, and certainly not as backup plans for your own catastrophic mistakes. Emotional awareness in parenting means actively teaching a child how to process failure, how to gracefully accept the word no, and how to take ownership of their actions. Richard and Brenda lacked this vital awareness entirely. They looked at Naava, responsible, diligent, and corporately successful, and did not see a brilliant daughter to be immensely proud of. Instead, they saw a golden goose to be aggressively harvested. They weaponized the traditional values of filial piety and familial loyalty, twisting the concept of a loving family into an instrument of vicious emotional blackmail. "We raised you. You owe us." This toxic, manipulative mantra is the battle cry of the emotionally bankrupt parent, designed to keep a capable child forever chained to a sinking ship. This staggering failure of long-term guidance brings us directly to the tragedy of the golden child. Haley did not become a cold-blooded criminal mastermind overnight. The dark transformation from a spoiled, whining teenager into a 26-year-old architect of federal identity theft was a slow, agonizingly predictable process. When parents consistently prioritize a child's immediate comfort over their long-term character, they are not demonstrating love. They are committing a profound act of psychological sabotage. Every single time Brenda deflected accountability away from her youngest daughter, and every time Richard provided an unearned soft landing for her academic or social failures, they were meticulously laying the bricks for her eventual prison cell. Fairness in raising children is not about distributing financial resources equally or giving them everything they demand. True fairness is giving a child the firm boundaries they desperately need to understand how the real, unforgiving world actually operates. If a family absolutely refuses to teach a child about the crushing weight of consequences, the criminal justice system will eventually do it for them. And the justice system does not grade on a curve or accept fake tears. Nava's journey forces us to confront the heavy burden placed upon the responsible child. In many dysfunctional families, the child who demands the least attention is expected to bear the greatest weight. Nava was forced into a perverse inversion of the natural family structure. She was expected to parent her own parents, to absorb their colossal debts, and to light her own future on fire to keep her abusers warm. Her ultimate victory was not merely reclaiming the physical deed to her craftsman home or watching her tormentors get hauled away in armored vehicles. Her true triumph was recognizing that the generational cycle of abuse had to be violently and permanently severed. She understood that saving her family would have required destroying herself. In drawing that absolute boundary, she modeled a brutal but necessary truth. Sometimes the most profoundly healthy action a person can take is to walk away completely, leaving the perpetrators to drown in the very storm they created. These are the harsh, unspoken realities that so many people face silently behind the closed doors of beautifully manicured, heavily mortgaged suburban homes. It is the silent, pervasive epidemic of toxic family dynamics that society politely ignores. If this story resonates with the hidden battles you are fighting in your own life, if you are currently navigating the complex, often heartbreaking journey of setting boundaries, demanding fairness, and breaking generational curses, I want you to know that you are not alone. Please consider subscribing and following the Morning Revenge channel. We are building a dedicated community, committed to exposing these dark truths, sharing stories of absolute resilience, and learning how to reclaim our lives and our peace piece by shattered peace. Your support allows us to keep bringing these vital, empowering narratives into the light. As the dust finally settles on Nava's former life, and the heavy wooden door of her new Montana sanctuary clicks shut against the winter wind, we are left to deeply ponder the invisible threads that bind us to our own bloodlines. Parenting is a lifelong, undeniable echo. The core values we instill, the petty lies we tolerate, and the blatant favoritism we excuse do not just magically vanish when our children turn 18 and move out. They harden into the permanent architecture of their adult lives, shaping every relationship they will ever have. Nava survived her family with her freedom and her finances intact, but the profound silence of her beautiful, empty new house must occasionally ring with the phantom memories of what should have been, the ghost of a family that loved her for who she was, rather than what she could blindly provide. We all carry the psychological blueprints drafted by the people who raised us. Some of us use those blueprints to build impenetrable fortresses of peace, while others spend a lifetime desperately trying to escape the suffocating prisons their parents designed. When you look across the dinner table at your own relatives, or when you hear the familiar ringtone of a family member calling late at night, you must ask yourself what foundation your relationships are truly built upon. Is it constructed of mutual respect, emotional awareness, and brutal honesty? Or is it held together by unspoken debts, toxic obligations, and lingering guilt? The physical door to the past can be locked, the brass keys can be thrown away, and the geographic miles can stretch out into the thousands. But as the snow